Welcome to this BBC News by-election results programme with me, Jo Coburn. Counting is well underway in both Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire, and it's going to be an interesting night. Both seats are currently in Conservative hands, but can they hold on in the face of strong challenges from both Labour and the Liberal Democrats? We have reporters at the Tamworth count in Staffordshire and also at the count in Mid Bedfordshire. We'll also be speaking to election expert Professor Sir John Curtis. And with me in the studio is our panel, The Mirror's political editor John Stevens and The Spectator's political editor Katie Balls. We also have Energy Minister Andrew Bowie, the Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson and Sarah Olney for the Liberal Democrats. In a moment, we'll go live to both counts, but before we do, a quick thought from the politicians, starting with you, Andrew. Be honest, what is your hunch for the outcome this evening? Because big majorities, but really strong challenges, and I know that both Labour and the Liberal Democrats think they might be able to take them off you.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's always difficult for a government mid-term to fight by-elections, and we are facing tough competition tonight. But we're very proud of the campaign that we've ran in both Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire. Andrew and Festus have been fantastic candidates going out there pressing the flesh. And when I've been out and about in both constituencies, the impression that I've got is that these are genuine candidates who are cutting through and that people are relating to them. But obviously, it's very early. It's very early to tell, Joe, what the results are going to be. It will be difficult. There's no doubt about it. Difficult set of circumstances and a mid-term by-election, so we'll see what happens to the rest of it. I mean,
Bridget, it would be quite something if Labour took these two seats, particularly Tamworth. I mean, you need a pretty extraordinary swing, even though these are by-elections. Again, what have you been hearing?
Our candidates in both Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire have fought really strong, positive campaigns, really focused on the issues that matter most to voters: the cost of living, access to NHS services, the rising issues that we're seeing around crime. So really strong positive campaign. As you say, these are seats that we wouldn't need to win in order to form a majority government, but we fought a really strong campaign. We're confident we'll see voters coming towards Labour. Whether that's enough, we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, is it true to say, Sarah Olney, that the Liberal Democrats aren't anywhere in Tamworth particularly, but in Mid Bedfordshire you have fought a strong campaign, although we certainly heard from Labour figures on the ground there that they were slightly frustrated that the Liberal Democrats were putting in a strongish showing?
Well, we ran a really strong campaign in Mid Bedfordshire. Our candidate there, Emma, has been really fantastic. I mean, it's been a very long campaign because obviously Nadine Dorries first announced her resignation in June and then took a while to really make good on that. So it's been a really, really long campaign, but I've been so impressed with Emma. She's kept going. She's been so cheerful, so professional throughout, and it's been a real pleasure to campaign for her. You know, we've worked really, really hard right up until the end. We've had hundreds of activists out knocking doors in Mid Bedfordshire today because we do think, we've thought all along that we have a chance of winning. But I know from speaking to people in the constituency today, it's going to be incredibly close. We've won 4 by-elections so far this Parliament. You know, we've got, I think, a pretty good record. We know what we're looking for, but this one is so hard to call.
Well, as you say, you've had plenty of practice because there have been so many by-elections this year. I think this is the 6th and the 7th. And to pick up on Sarah's point, we'll get the latest from both counts in just a moment. But let's remind ourselves how we got here.
These by-elections were triggered by the resignations of 2 Conservative MPs. First, Mid Bedfordshire's Nadine Dorries.
The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's resignation honours list has finally been published, and conspicuous by her absence is Nadine Dorries.
That row over a peerage lasted months.
She's been resigning for longer than Liz Truss was actually the Prime Minister for.
Then in August, she quit.
Nadine Dorries, the Conservative MP and former Minister, has resigned her Commons seat with a scathing attack on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
2 weeks later, there was another.
The former Conservative Housing Minister, Chris Pincher, has resigned as an MP.
The Tamworth MP had lost the Tory whip more than a year ago.
The Conservative Party has suspended the MP, Chris Pincher, following allegations he assaulted 2 men.
Both seats have big Conservative majorities, but with Tamworth having voted Labour in the past, and Lib Dems and Labour both confident they can win in Mid Bedfordshire, tonight's results will help set the political mood for the rest of the year.
Well, in a moment, we'll find out what is happening in Mid Bedfordshire. But first, let's talk to my colleague Ione Wells, who is in Tamworth. Hello to you, Ione. How's it shaping up there?
Evening, Joe. Well, voting is well underway here in Tamworth, and it has been a really interesting campaign. As that video touched on, Tamworth is a really safe Conservative seat. It's been increasingly safe over the last couple of general elections, a 19,000 seat majority that the Labour Party are trying to overturn. Now, in terms of kind of the atmosphere on the campaign so far, what's interesting is both camps have been really stressing that they're picking up a lot of disaffection with the Conservatives and with the government, but not necessarily huge amounts of enthusiasm for Labour either. And this kind of presents challenges for both parties. Now, for the Conservatives, clearly, if they were not to hold this seat, that would spell out big trouble for them, losing such a big majority in a seat like Tamworth. Even if Labour didn't quite clinch it, but just got a big swing, I think that would still be worrying Conservatives going into a general election next year. But I think the mood that I've been picking up is that the Labour Party aren't particularly enthusiastic either about the reception they've had on the doorstep. I think they are nervous about the fact that if a year out from a general election, they aren't necessarily kind of convincing people who might be unsure or unenthusiastic about the Tories to enthusiastically vote Labour, then that also potentially spells a problem for them too. Now, what both parties are saying is that there are lots of people who just don't know, who aren't particularly enthused either way, that if don't know was an option on the ballot paper, it may well do pretty well here. So I think turnout is something that everyone has their eyes on tonight. There is certainly a sense that turnout could be quite low for that reason, but also could be really, really key in shaping who is successful tonight.
Well, Ione, without being a hostage to fortune, any idea of timings for a result?
Well, the expectation is that a result might come around 3:30, 4 in the morning. But again, that may well depend on how close this is. Certainly the kind of rumblings and rumours here in the room is that this could be incredibly close. And obviously, if it were very close, will that end up leading to recounts? We don't know yet, but certainly there is sort of speculation mounting that this is very, very close to call. Neither party wanting to kind of build expectations at this stage. Normally, at this kind of time, at some of these counts, you get a sense of who's feeling more optimistic, who's feeling more pessimistic. Tonight, not so much. Both camps feeling pretty muted, so could still be quite a long night ahead. But at the moment, the expectation is around 3:30 or 4 in the morning for that first count to be finished.
Well, we'll come back to you well before then, Ione, I can assure you. That's how things are looking in Tamworth. Let's talk to our colleague Helen Catt, who's in Mid Bedfordshire. Helen, what's the scene there?
Well, I'll be surprised if anyone in this building has got any fingernails left by the early hours, Joe. We're in a really unusual situation here. Usually by this point, again, as Ione was saying there, you'd have some indication of who might be out in front here. But in Mid Bedfordshire, it is a three-way fight, and it's happening in a constituency that has been Conservative since 1931. So they haven't really got a huge frame of reference to look back on. So one of the party activists I spoke to earlier was saying even their most dedicated number cruncher, who's a veteran of campaigns, was going into this count saying it was the one that he knew least about or had ever known least about. The one thing all party sources do seem to be able to agree on is that it's going to be extremely close and that the Conservative vote will have dropped significantly. So that's really where they're in agreement. But you've got the Liberal Democrats saying that they have seen their vote surge in the rural villages, and this is a constituency that is very rural. It's sort of sandwiched between Luton, Bedford and Milton Keynes, but it's largely made up of around 50 villages and 3 small towns. So the Lib Dems reckon their vote has surged there. Labour, though, think they have done well too. The Conservatives could hold on. At this stage, nobody wants to call it. Now, I'm told they have almost finished verifying, or have finished verifying. They're about to start actually counting, so maybe things will start to become clearer. I think from talking to people here, the hunch from some activists is that if anyone has pipped the Tories to this, then it's likely to have been Labour, but that is at this stage just a hunch. I suppose this is really a fitting end to what has been quite an extraordinary by-election campaign. It's lasted a long time. It's been going on for 4 months. The day after Nadine Dorries said she was going to resign in June, they kicked off here delivering leaflets and out and about knocking doors. They've been doing that ever since constantly. One candidate from a smaller party that I spoke to earlier said that actually he was finding that voters were just switching off now, that he was being told he was the 5th person who'd knocked their door that day and they just wanted it over with.
Yes, they may not be the only ones. Helen Catt, thank you very much for joining us there in Mid Bedfordshire. Picking up on those points, I mean, is that what you've been hearing too, is that it's too close to call, that no one has been even privately saying to either of you, starting with you, John, who's ahead?
So, I mean, this evening you always get expectation management. You don't expect anyone like Bridget, Andrew and Sarah to come in tonight and say, we've definitely done it, we've won. And it is the same when you're WhatsApping and texting people. You've got to take everything that anyone says with a slight kind of pinch of salt. It sounds that if Labour has done it in either seats, it's possible they've done it in Tamworth, but it sounds like Mid Bedfordshire, they're much less confident, and it sounds like there's a possibility that the Tories have gone through the middle by the Lib Dems and Labour splitting that opposition vote.
Right. In terms of the Tories, disaffection, people staying at home, a low turnout, these are all things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with Conservative voters.
Exactly. Though at the same time, I was speaking to one Tory politician earlier and said, oh, it sounds, there could be higher turnout in one of these seats. And I said, oh, not sure if we want that. In the sense, it's quite hard to get the Tory vote out in a by-election. So I think when they see higher turnout, what you think is it, the worry there was, has Labour managed to get their people out? Is it a sign that when things are so tight, it could go one way? So I think from politicians, a lot of poker faces until we get the results. But I think it's certainly the case that even with the spin, I think the Tories are worried that, the vote has fallen so much that it is just too close to call in Mid Bedfordshire. I think they've been pretty pessimistic about Tamworth for some time now.
Right.
But if there is a double loss, I think there's going to be a bit of a blame game coming to them.
Right. Well, actually, we've got the turnout in Tamworth. It's 35.9%. Pretty low, even by-elections, particularly when these are competitive ones. Bad news for you?
Look, you can't read anything into turnout and what it might mean
you might be able
for
to.
the result. But as we've all said, these have been difficult by-elections. It's mid-term. It's difficult to get people excited for by-elections quite often. And the weather hasn't exactly been very helpful to us either on polling day. So, look, we need to wait to see what the results are. We can't read anything into what the turnout is and what that might mean. But, as Ione said earlier on, what we were finding very much in both constituencies was there is no love for Keir Starmer or the Labour Party either. There's no impetus, there's no momentum behind the Labour Party or the votes going towards them. So we'll just have to wait and see. Joe, frankly, right now we just don't know.
Well, let's talk about the two seats and some of the numbers, because I'm delighted to say that Professor Sir John Curtis from Strathclyde University will be with us through the night, and it could be a long one from our newsroom here in Westminster, but he's good at staying up for hours on end. Just before I pose a question to you, John, I'm just going to show everyone the Conservative majorities from the 2019 general election. Tamworth, just over 19,500, and Mid Bedfordshire, just over 24,500. Those are very strong, sizable majorities. But as I said earlier, probably a Conservative Labour fight in Tamworth and a three-way fight in Mid Bedfordshire. Why is that?
Well, that's because in Mid Bedfordshire, both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have decided to fight the seat vigorously, whereas hitherto in the by-elections in this Parliament, either one or other of them has been campaigning and the other one has frankly fought a paper campaign. So, for example, back in the summer, the Liberal Democrats contested Somerton and Frome, and the Labour Party didn't really make much of a show. But conversely, in Selby and Ainsty, and indeed in Uxbridge, it was the Labour Party that was campaigning to try to take the seat off the Conservatives. This is the first time when the parties haven't been able to agree as to who has the better chance. Perhaps not surprising because, Labour Party has never, ever won Mid Bedfordshire. And the Liberal Democrats were second in the constituency in 2005 and 2010. And I think also one has to bear in mind that, given there are two by-elections, the Liberal Democrats want at least to be trying to make a showing in one of them. Otherwise, tonight would have been a rather miserable one for them indeed. So you can understand why, given the circumstances of the constituency and given that there are two by-elections and the Liberal Democrats want to be able to show that they can do damage to the Conservatives as well, why they've decided to take the risk of fighting Mid Bedfordshire fairly rigorously. All
right. I mean, when we look, though, at Labour's position, if they were to win one or both of these by-elections, it would be quite something for them, wouldn't it, converting those majorities into a Labour victory?
Yes, we should be aware that for the Labour Party to win Tamworth, it requires the sixth biggest swing from Conservative to Labour in by-election records. and Mid Bedfordshire, it's the 7th highest. These are very, very much at the outer end of the kind of constituency we might expect to go, even in a by-election when a government is deeply unpopular. And frankly, the only reason really why we're thinking it's possible is because in Selby, the swing was 24%, a little bit above what Labour require in Tamworth, as well as in Mid Bedfordshire. But the truth is, if Labour win either of one of these two constituencies, it will be quite an achievement. If they were to succeed in winning both of them, or if indeed the Democrats win one and Labour would one, it would be a very, very bad night for the Conservatives indeed.
If they hold on to one or both of these seats, the Conservatives, bear in mind the backdrop of the polls, Labour broadly 20 points ahead for quite some time now, they could hold on, but only just. Would that say very much about a state of improvement for the Conservatives?
Well, I think the honest truth is, although we're expecting two close results, and maybe, as we've already discussed, we might be in for a recount, and to that extent at least, we all may get caught up in the apparent excitement of the night. The truth is that folk like me will be interested not necessarily in who wins, but literally in how big is the swing. If at the end of the day, the swing in Tamworth is, let us say, 17, 18, 90%, the Conservatives end up with about a 5% majority, we will still be saying that this is the kind of swing that confirms the message of the opinion polls, which is that the Conservatives are still on average around 17 points behind Labour in the opinion polls. And equally, if in Mid Bedfordshire, perhaps the Conservative vote goes down 25, maybe even 30 points, but they still hang on to the seat because of the split opposition vote, we were again saying, well, remember, there aren't very many constituencies where the Conservatives are going to be saved by both Labour and the Democrats fighting the seat vigorously in a general election. And this is, again, will be evidence of a government in deep trouble. So the truth is, the only way that this can really be a good night for the Conservatives is if we end up with swings, shall we say, below the 15% mark that we're currently seeing on average in the national opinion polls.
Sir John Curtis, thank you very much, and we'll come back to you later on in the evening. Feeling good now after listening to that, Andrew Bowe, in terms of the Conservatives? I mean, obviously, psychologically, it would be a huge boost if you did manage to hold on to it. But it's true. If Labour or the Liberal Democrats were able to overturn or get close to overturning those sorts of majorities and the swings that would be needed, it would still be pretty awful for you.
Look, we're very much in the realms of speculation here.
Well,
we don't have any
we're
of the
waiting
results.
for the
We're still
result,
many
but
hours away
these are the
possibly
options.
from the results. As I've said, and I'm sure I will continue to say for the next few hours, by-elections, especially mid-term, are difficult. Governments do not tend to win by-elections, so we're fighting this against a difficult backdrop.
But these aren't just by-elections in the way that you've just characterised them. These are by-elections in rock-solid Conservative areas and seats. Mid Bedfordshire, a constituency made up of villages, rural villages mainly, and it's been in Tory hands for nearly 100 years. Tamworth, admittedly, Labour did have Tamworth up until 2010, but even so, a very, very strong leave area, and it would take a monumental swing. So it's not just by-elections. These are particularly strong Tory seats.
Look, very difficult circumstances nationally. People feel disaffection for the state of politics right now. There's no love, I don't think, for any of the main political parties out there in the country, and people are reserving judgment about who they're going to vote for in that general election. But these by-elections were fought on specific issues, specific local issues as well, affecting what might the outcome be this evening. And so, as I said, we wait for the result, but very difficult. Governments do not tend to win by-elections, but we are very pleased and happy with the positive campaign that we've run in both Mid Bedfordshire and in Tamworth.
I mean, Bridget Phillipson, one of the themes running through these by-elections is that there isn't enough enthusiasm for the Labour Party and Keir Starmer. An awful lot of don't knows. And we are edging closer to a general election. I mean, you may win, and that will be, something of a victory. But why are there still so many people who don't know yet about the Labour Party?
These are two of the safest Tory seats in the country. You've just shown the majorities there, massive Tory majorities. And in the case of Mid Bedfordshire, a constituency in which we've not really had any presence before. So it took us time to get up and running, but then we fought a very strong campaign. The fact that we're even having this conversation, that these seats are in play, I think shows just how much the Labour Party has changed, shows we're on the pitch. And I'll be looking at the swings that we see tonight. And, these seats are not seats that are on our target list for the general election, but we're having this conversation about whether we might be in with a chance tonight of taking them. But certainly we're expecting big swings to Labour, so people can say they're not sensing enthusiasm. The proof will be in the pudding.
Right, well, before I come to you, Sarah, let's have a look at some of the figures that we've been talking about, the swings, as we call it, away from one party and towards another. You can see both of the by-elections, Mid Bedfordshire there, Labour would need a 19.1% swing, and in Tamworth, a whopping 21.3% swing. Now, to give you an idea of how well Labour have been performing recently in by-elections, we can go back to our last programme in July. Well, they've certainly done well in Selby and Ainslie, so they have reached the dizzying heights of 23.7% back in July to take that seat there. In Uxbridge and South Ruislip, a much smaller swing towards Labour and not enough to take the seat. As you can see, and you may remember, the Conservatives held on. Sarah, I'm going to now go on to the Liberal Democrat swings, and, you know, you are a party that traditionally does well when it comes to by-elections. We'll see what happens this evening. But this is Mid Bedfordshire. The swing that you would need is 23.6% swing. I mean, that is big, but you have done that before. If we have a look at the by-elections recently, the one in July for Somerton and Frome, you reached 29%. So it's doable in terms of your past performance, but perhaps not on the basis of the three-way fight going on. And in Tiverton and Honiton last year, nearly 30% swing. Do you regret not perhaps stepping aside in Mid Bedfordshire and allowing Labour to be the only challenger to deprive the Conservatives of the seat?
Gosh, no, absolutely not. We've had a really, really good campaign
in other seats.
In Mid Bedfordshire. And, you know, we went out there when Nadine first announced she was standing down. We did some canvassing, and we found so many voters there who were sick to death of the Conservatives, who were keen to find somebody else to vote for. Very similar circumstances to what we found when we first went out in places like North Shropshire, for example, or Cheshire and Amersham. So we knew from the very start that we had a great opportunity there, and we've worked incredibly hard. We expect to see a big increase in the Liberal Democrat share of the vote in Mid Bedfordshire, but it's been a really tough campaign, and obviously a lot of competition for those votes.
Were you frustrated by the fact that there couldn't be a sort of informal agreement that in this by-election the Liberal Democrats could have made room for Labour?
No, voters deserve a choice of parties, a choice of candidates. We fought a really strong campaign, and I think that's what matters most.
Right. I mean, when it comes to the seats themselves, just to put them in context, Nadine Dorries in Mid Bedfordshire, as we've heard, she resigned, although, as I say, not immediately. It took quite a long time, not because she got a seat in the Lords, but because she didn't get one. And I think there will probably be a lot of voters who will take a rather dim view of that in terms of her departing.
Completely. I think you can say in both of these seats, they're not really examples of Tory MPs behaving well. And when it comes to the Nadine Dorries one, I think to ultimately quit over a row about peerages is not the issue most people are thinking about in terms of their daily life or how they're going to vote. And I think it looks quite self-indulgent. And therefore, I think also to have it drag out in the way it was, where, you know, announcing on social media you're going to do so, then Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams also, you know, joined forces, but they had their by-elections well before this. And you had multiple reports from friends of Nadine Dorries, allies of Nadine Dorries and so forth about the different reasons she was delaying it. But one thing that kept coming up was she wanted to inflict pain on Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. We know she has a book coming out, which we don't think is going to be particularly positive about Rishi Sunak, who she clearly blames in relation to Boris Johnson's demise. And therefore, I think by dragging it out, there was talk by some around her that it means that Rishi Sunak could not just get these by-elections out of the way. You drag them into the autumn, and then potentially, if things go wrong for the Tories, you just have this sense of decay. Yeah. And we may have another by-election through Peterbone to be decided. And I think that's what's tricky for him. But I don't think Nadine Dorries has made it easy for the Tories.
Will it be her fault if you lose in Mid Bedfordshire?
Look, I don't think we want to get into the blame game just yet. I think...
You're saving that for a bit later. That's why I'm asking you. So you are going to blame her?
No, look, I mean, when we've been talking to people on the doorsteps for the last few months in the Mid Bedfordshire campaign, you know, Nadine Dorries and her resignation actually hasn't come up all that often. People are concerned about, you know, the cost of living. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about what we're going to do to deliver on the priorities that the Prime Minister set out earlier this year. That's where our focus is going to be. And whatever whatever happens tonight, that's what we're going to continue focusing on. So I think the people of Mid Bedfordshire and around the country just want us to get on focusing on what they care about. That's what certainly came across when we were knocking on doors, and that's what we're going to carry on doing.
Let's talk about Tamworth, because Tamworth is interesting, not just because it is, again, a very solid Conservative seat, but it was also one of those areas that voted very strongly to leave the European Union. And in fact, that region of the Staffordshire, West Midlands, most of the seats were the same. So for Labour, how significant would it be if Labour does take this seat, not just in terms of the size of the majority, but the sort of seat that we are talking about?
I think the Labour Party would find it very encouraging. As you say, in Tamworth, 66% of voters backed Brexit. We thought that a lot of those seats after 2019, when the Tories made a lot of progress, and all of those red wall seats, you suddenly saw people switching to the Tory party for the first time. And we thought it would be very difficult for Labour to unpick that, particularly in one election cycle. And so I think if you do start to see seats like Tamworth coming back to the Labour Party, and if the Labour Party did win it, as we have been saying, that would be a massive swing. It's the 55th safest Tory seat in the list. So as much as Andrew and his colleagues might say, governments don't win by-elections, maybe, but they don't usually lose ones with such strong majorities.
Because would it be an indication of Labour's strength in an area that they have struggled with lately? So there could be other towns and seats close by, like Rugby, like Nuneaton, seats that they would very much like to win in a general election. Would this be an indicator of that?
Yeah, and as we say, I mean, the Tories might still hang on to this seat, and I think if they do, then we'll hear from different Tory MPs about how this is, the fight back's begun and Rishi Sunak's OK. But actually, in private, a lot of Andrew's colleagues will be looking at the swing and thinking, hang on a minute, my majority is much smaller than that, and I'm possibly now at risk.
Right, I mean, a large part of your party's pitch, Andrew, to voters for the last 13 years has been that Labour effectively tanked the economy and shouldn't be trusted again. Yep. So with that logic in mind, with high inflation, high interest rates, high rents, high taxes, high levels of debt, mass public sector strikes, low growth and wage stagnation, we can say you've tanked the economy over the last 13 years and voters shouldn't trust you.
No, because...
Well, which bit of that isn't right of the list?
Those are issues facing just about every economy in the Western world, and only Rishi Sunak. Yes, but Britain was worst affected of just about every economy back in 2010 when we inherited the situation.
Would you agree that the high inflation here is one of the highest in the G7?
Only Rishi Sunak's got a plan to actually cut inflation. It's his #1 priority, and we're actually progressing towards a place where we are going to deliver on his commitment to have inflation. That's what we're doing.
But if you're presented with
I
those,
have no idea what the Labour Party or Keir Starmer's plan
well, I'll come on to them in a minute.
Or grow the economy.
Yeah, but just the principle, just stepping back the principle. If you were given that list as measures and metrics of an economy, you could argue, in the same way you did in 2010, effectively as it turned out, that you've tanked the economy.
No, I don't think you could, and I think that the people out there want to hear what we're going to do to actually recover, how we're going to rebuild the economy, how we're going to make people feel better off, how we're going to tackle the big issues of the day that are facing this country. And only Rishi Sunak and only the Conservatives actually set out a plan which is bold, a plan which is going to deliver a change of the way we've been doing things in this country for the last 30 years, taking tough decisions.
What about the last 13 years?
Well, the last 30, I think we've got a record that we can be very proud of over the last 13 years, what we've delivered for this country. We want to go on and build on that. But of course, times have been tough. The economic situation facing just about every single economy in the Western world is tough right now, but only Rishi Sunak's got a plan to actually reverse that trend and actually rebuild our economy to the place that we want it to be.
Well, Bridget, we'll just show, and Sarah, we'll just show our guests and our viewers the key issues. Unsurprising that economy is at the top and health not far behind. And I suppose what voters have been asking you and others on the doorstep is that there is little to no room for spending on tax cuts. What would be the difference of a Labour government? You're not going to do anything different, not radically. I know you've got your policies around VAT on private school fees, and you've got your non-dom, getting rid of the non-dom status to raise a few £1 billion. But essentially, it's going to look the same, certainly for the first year or so. So why vote Labour? Perhaps that's the reason you've got so many don't-knows.
So firstly, I think what voters do want is a sense of security and stability, not least where it comes to the economy. And what Andrew's just described there is the Conservatives kind of cleaning up their own mess. We had all of that chaos last year where they crashed the economy. People are paying for that every single day in increased mortgage bills. That came up a lot, I've got to say, particularly in Mid Bedfordshire. Alongside that, what we've said, we were saying all the week before at Labour Party conference as well, our plan for growth, to invest in green industries of the future, to make sure we've got the skills that we need in order to succeed as a country. And in my area of education, how we make sure that background is no barrier to kids getting on in this country. Life has got a lot tougher for people over the last 13 years. And I think
got any money, by your own admission, if you win a general election next year, to do anything radical about those things.
The difference between what we saw under 13 years of a Labour government versus 13 years of a Conservative government is that under a Labour government we had a growing economy, and therefore we had money to invest in.
You inherited economy. You inherited an economy that was on the rise.
Absolutely, and that's not going to be the case if we win the next general election.
So you won't be able to do the things you want to do.
So we have to focus on growth, absolutely. But we've got to have that underpinning of strong economic stability. We've seen what happens when that isn't the case. And we are going to pay a heavy price as a country for all of that chaos over the last year or so. And voters don't forget this. I mean, they can kind of come in and pretend that Rishi Sunak's this new guy and it's all going to be very different. No one voted for him. He was the second choice of his own party. The voters have never had the chance to have their say on him. And I think what we will see tonight, I mean, it's, you know, we can't be kind of certain of this, but I'm hearing positive things from the counts.
Are you?
That in both counts. If we were to take both seats, that would be an historic achievement for the Labour Party. Two very safe Conservative seats. And as you were saying, particularly in the West Midlands, Tamworth not on our list of target seats, but I think shows a clear direction. If we're kind of seeing big swings in places like the West Midlands, that's a really encouraging sign for us. And I think shows how much Keir Starmer's turned around the Labour Party.
Well, Sarah, let's stick with the economy for a little bit longer, because Sir Ed Davey, your leader, Lib Dem leader, says the UK has to repair its relationship with Europe to boost the economy. That's one of the ways he wants to get growth. But why aren't you calling to rejoin anymore or be part of the single market? That would be one way of boosting growth.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely right. You know, the Tories, you know, total, you know, a catastrophic management of the economy and everything they've been doing over the last few years has really undermined confidence with our international partners. Right. You know, Britain used to be a beacon of stability and reliability, and they've completely trashed that reputation. So it's so important that you know, we start to rebuild that relationship with Europe, with our other international partners.
But not by changing the relationship.
We've got a four-stage plan. And what we want to do is we want to start with rebuilding some of just the fundamentals of that relationship. Then we want to start looking at you know, some of the sort of individual agreements that we can come to. And eventually, and we're quite clear about this, we'd like to rejoin the single market. But it's a four-stage plan because it will take time. It can't happen overnight.
All right, let's catch up with Ione Wells, our correspondent who is at Tamworth. Ione, tell us what's going on now.
Evening, Joe. Well, we've just had the turnout figures for the counting here in Tamworth, and a pretty low turnout. It was 35.9%. Now, to put that in context, we know that the turnout in Mid Bedfordshire is at 44%, and also most of the by-elections that have happened in the last year have had turnouts of kind of in the mid-40s. The only one that was lower than tonight's turnout was in West Lancashire, Safe Labour's seat. That's the only by-election this year that's had a lower turnout than we're seeing tonight. So joining me now is the Conservative MP, Craig Tracy. We're going to talk a little bit about that figure. Why do you think the turnout has been so low here in Tamworth?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, these are always difficult elections for, you know, later in the year. You know, there was always a sense that there might be a little bit of voter apathy out there. So, you know, we'll have to see exactly what it means in certain wards, but it's, as I say, I think it is a disappointingly low turnout, I have to say.
Why have the Conservatives struggled to get people out and voting for you in this election, do you think?
Well, we don't know if it's just the Conservatives struggling to get people out voting, but I think, you know, the conversations on the doorstep that we've had a lot were that, you know, there's certainly love out there for the Labour Party, but I think people felt like, you know, that they wanted to send a message to government. They know that during a by-election, it's not going to change the government, but actually it can send a clear message that, you know, they're not necessarily happy with how things are, you know, in their lives. So, you know, we'll do some analysis on this, but I think that's probably the potential why, if it is our vote that's not come out, that's probably going to be why.
And you mentioned apathy there. What's driving that apathy from conversations you've been having on the doorstep here?
I think a lot of it is just around voter fatigue. You know, they've had a lot of elections over a lot of years. We're 12 months out from the general election, and I think, you know, like I say, October and a stormy day in October, encouraging people to go out when they're thinking, you know, it's only going to be for probably 12 months or so. You know, it's quite a difficult sell. But like I say, I think the message that we got through was that people aren't going away from us, but it's just they want a strong reason to come out and vote, which we've got the time to do.
And this is really a seat that the Conservatives should be winning. There's a 19,000 majority. The majority's increased year on year in the last couple of general elections. How bad will it be for you if the Tories don't win tonight?
Well, I think, you know, all being well, we do win, but if we don't, by-elections are very difficult, different beasts, and, you know, I wouldn't read too much into that necessarily. There's still everything to play for in a general election. You know, you look at the recent by-elections where, for example, even in Scotland, where the SNP lost a seat to Labour, actually with a lower winning margin than they lost by in 2019. So I think, you know, these are generally protest votes, and, you know, history will teach us that you can't really extrapolate that to what would happen in a general election.
Is anything giving you cause for optimism from conversations you've been having in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people are talking to us. I think being out on the doorstep, you know, it's not been hostile at all. People have been very, very friendly. You know, there are frustrations out there. We fully accept that. You know, it's been an interesting time in politics for all of us. But I think the general message is, you know, that they don't want to leave us, but they just want more of a reason to get out and vote. And that is our job to do that.
Has Rishi Sunak given people in Tamworth enough of a reason to come out and vote, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, longer term, when his plan, you know, he's got his plan in place now. We're starting to see the benefits of that. We're starting to see inflation fall. Those are the things that people really care about. And I think, you know, as things move on, as we get nearer to a general election, they've had more time to bed in, then I think that will, you know, give people that oomph that they need to get out and back us.
Craig Tracy, thanks so much for talking to us. I'm sure we will talk to you again as the evening goes on and we get further updates about how the night is going. We'll be speaking to Labour as well about how they're feeling tonight. But just a reminder that the turnout, 35.9%, pretty low, the second lowest turnout of any by-election this year. So we are still waiting to see what that will mean from the two parties who are fighting it out to win tonight.
Thank you very much, Ione, there in Tamworth. Let's pick up on that low turnout. I know we mentioned it earlier. Disappointing, clearly, and it does sound like there could be many Tory voters who have decided to stay at home.
Yeah, and I think you'd hear it in that interview, which is, what is the reason to get Tory voters out during a by-election, particularly the circumstances of the Tamworth by-election, as well as Mid Bedfordshire? And when you speak to figures in Conservative campaign headquarters, they are saying, you know, they don't necessarily think all their voters have moved to Labour in the example of Tamworth, but they do think that their voters are probably staying at home. And that does raise the question, which is, you know, you kept hearing there from the Tory MP, well, it's fine because there's not an election for a long time. Well, there's definitely an election by next January.
Yes.
Increasingly, I think next January is going up a bit.
Playing it long.
In the desirability, just if things are as bad as the polls currently suggest. But, you know, what is going to be the changing factor between now, you know, in about 12 months' time, say it's an autumn election, even say spring if they decide that's the best option. And I think, you know, talking about Rishi Sunak's long-term plan, I think there's still, you know, if there is this, you know, it doesn't really, you get to a point where you can say, oh, there's not an enthusiastic vote for Labour, but if the anti-Tory vote stays where it is, that's not such a problem, really, for Keir Starmer. And I think it's a much bigger issue for the Tories, thinking about how you galvanise and get your vote out come the next election.
I mean, there was also something else that was being discussed, which is if the Conservatives hold Tamworth, it might only be that MP's chance for a year until the next election. Why is that?
Yeah, so bizarrely, even though we thought for a long time there might be a by-election here ever since Chris Pincher got accused of groping those two men in the Carlton Club, despite the prospect of this possible by-election in the future, they ran a selection process and picked Eddie Hughes, who's currently an MP in Walsall. And so he wasn't able to run in this by-election because if he had, then they'd have to have a by-election in Walsall as well, which wouldn't have been desirable.
No.
But now, in the last few weeks, it sounds like they've come to an agreement where if the Tory guy, Andy Cooper, does win in Tamworth, then Eddie Hughes will try and find a different seat, won't try and take over from him at the general election.
Right, I think we can show you. We were talking about Nadine Dorries, this obviously in Mid Bedfordshire, a little earlier, and she has been quite active on Twitter, which is quite usual for her. She tweeted this. Of course, Number 10 are planning to blame me. That's if the Conservatives lose tonight in Mid Bedfordshire. Rishi's personal rating on the negative floor at -25 as Starmer's leaps upwards. She goes on to say, Labour Party polling 20% ahead of Tories, but it was always going to be my fault if Tories lose Mid Bedfordshire, never Rishi's. Andrew Bowie, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, look, as I said, Nadine actually didn't come up on the doorsteps very often during the Mid Bedfordshire by-election. People were bringing up concerns with the economy.
So if you lose, it will be Rishi's fault then, Rishi Sunak's.
Look, I really don't think any of this is helpful. I frankly think that
well, no to you, no.
Well, no, not for anybody, frankly. I think people out there in the country expect us to be dealing with the serious issues that they're facing, the issues that they care about, the issues with the economy, the cost of living, what we're going to do to rebuild the economy and move us forward into a better place. They frankly do not care what Nadine Dorries is saying on Twitter and what our response might be and who might get the blame for whatever might happen.
She was in the cabinet not that long ago as a senior politician. So is it time for her to sort of butt out of these contests?
Nadine was a valued colleague, and she did an excellent job as Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and was a long-serving Member of Parliament in the Conservative benches. I'm not going to sit here and criticise Nadine and her record on our benches, but it's important, I think, that when we do look at what happens tonight, whatever the result, we focus on what we are doing in the national interest and the tough decisions that we're taking as a government to support the British people, and not what former MPs may or may not be saying on Twitter about who may or may not be to blame for whatever the result may or may not be.
Well, that is the nature of these programmes, Andrew Bowie, in the lead-up to the results, is you spend a little bit of time speculating. Katie, you have some intelligence.
Yeah, so we now have a Lib Dem source effectively saying that they think they've taken lots of votes of the Tories in Mid Bedfordshire, but they think that in doing that they might have allowed Labour to get across the line. So that is the Liberal Democrats suggesting that they think Mid Bedfordshire could go to Labour, and trying to say that if that result does happen, it's partly down to them for kind of decreasing the Tory vote.
Oh, well, Sarah, what do you make of that?
I mean, I think what we found as we were going canvassing in Mid Bedfordshire, it's quite an interesting constituency. There's one or two large towns, but so an awful lot of just smaller villages. And certainly out in the villages, we were finding that that's where the kind of the lifelong Tory voters were. But just like everywhere else I've canvassed this year, completely disillusioned with the Tories, and you speak to them like, I'm definitely not voting for the Tories this time.
And what was the key issue?
And we were finding that many of those people, particularly in the villages, were prepared to vote for the Liberal Democrats, but wouldn't consider voting for Labour. So what we're saying is that it's those voters switching from Tories to the Liberal Democrats that have made it easier. If that's what the result turns out to be, for Labour to come through.
Well, we have plenty more to talk about until we get the results. But let's get the latest news headlines with Nikki Schiller.
Thanks, Joe. First, the latest on the Israel-Gaza war. Rishi Sunak has been in Saudi Arabia, where he's met the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to try and prevent the crisis in the Middle East from spreading. Number 10 said the pair agreed the loss of innocent lives in Israel and Gaza over the last 2 weeks has been horrific. Mr Sunak's spokesman said he encouraged Saudi Arabia to use its influence to support stability in the Middle East. The statement also said the Prime Minister and Crown Prince agreed on the pressing need for humanitarian access into Gaza. Earlier, the Prime Minister pledged to stand with Israel in its darkest hour. Rishi Sunak met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the country prepares for a possible ground offensive into Gaza, targeting members of Hamas, responsible for the deaths of around 1,400 people. Hamas is designated as a terror organisation by many Western governments, including the UK. Mr Sunak says the group represents pure evil.
Well, I'm pleased I could come to Israel at this important time. First and foremost, to express my solidarity with the Israeli people after they've suffered an absolutely horrific terrorist attack by Hamas. I've had good, productive conversations with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli President Herzog. Among other things, we discussed the importance of this conflict not escalating regionally and the importance of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza.
Well, the United Nations and aid agencies say lack of water, food, medicine and other essentials is making the situation for displaced people in Gaza increasingly desperate. Egyptian state media say the Rafah crossing into Gaza will be opened for several hours later today to allow the delivery of supplies. Lorries are at the border, although aid agencies fear the first consignments will not be nearly enough. The UN says designated shelters are overcrowded, water cannot be pumped or filtered because of Israel's block on fuel, and bottled water is now unaffordable for most families. In other news, the body of a 57-year-old woman has been recovered from a river in Angus as Storm Babette sweeps across eastern Scotland. Hundreds of people have been told to leave their homes. A red weather warning is in force for Angus, Aberdeenshire and parts of Perthshire, which means there is a risk to life. BBC Scotland's Phil MacDonald sent us this update from Aberdeen.
Some tragic news from Police Scotland this evening, who told us that at around 4 o'clock this afternoon, the body of a 57-year-old woman was recovered following reports of a person being swept into the water of Lee at Glen Esk in Angus. There are no suspicious circumstances. Now, authorities are stepping up their response to Storm Babette. The Deputy First Minister chaired a meeting of the Scottish Government's Resilience Committee. They expect to launch a major clean-up operation this weekend, with the worst of the storm yet to come. Fresh rest centres have been set up in West Aberdeenshire, in Inverurie, Kintore and Kemnay. Others in Stonehaven and Lawrencekirk will remain open overnight and into tomorrow. Now, Angus Council have told us that for those people in Brecon who have been told to leave their homes, there is a danger to life for those who choose not to do so.
While the focus is on the situation in eastern Scotland right now, there is also concern over the impact of rainfall expected to build up on the eastern side of the Pennines and Peak District, as well as parts of Greater Manchester, Cheshire and the Borders, with easterly winds piling rain into the area during the day. A Met Office amber warning comes into force from noon, with up to 120 millimetres of rain possible, with flooding and disruption likely. Now, as you've been hearing with Jo and her guests, votes are being counted in the two by-elections in Mid Bedfordshire and Tamworth. The vote in Tamworth followed the resignation of Chris Pincher in September. The former Conservative Deputy Whip was elected to the seat with a majority of more than 19,000 in 2019. Turnout there today was 35.9%. The poll in Mid Bedfordshire was triggered by the resignation of Nadine Dorries. The former Conservative Culture Secretary had a majority of nearly 25,000 in 2019. The seat has been won by the Tories since 1931. Turnout there, 44%. The COVID inquiry has heard that Rishi Sunak was referred to as Dr. Death by one of the government's most senior science officers after launching the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in 2020. Mr. Sunak was Chancellor at the time. The comment was made in a WhatsApp exchange between the epidemiologist Professor John Edmonds and Professor Dame Angela McLean, who is now the government's chief scientific advisor. Finally, train passengers are facing another 6 months of potential strikes. It's after members of the RMT union voted to continue taking action in their dispute about pay, jobs and conditions. The dispute with rail companies has been going on for nearly 18 months already. No fresh strike dates, though, have been announced. Well, I'll be back with an update later. Now it's back to Jo and our by-election special.
Welcome back, everyone. You heard there, actually, in the news from Nikki Schiller that, yes, the turnout in Mid Bedfordshire, one of the two by-elections that we're waiting for results from, was 44%. Pretty healthy, pretty usual for by-elections, particularly competitive ones, certainly significantly higher than the turnout in Tamworth in Staffordshire, which was 35.9%. Let's go to Mid Bedfordshire because Helen Catt is there. Helen.
Yes, so up until now, it's been pretty uncertain which way that the result is likely to go. All the parties have said this has been a particularly volatile by-election, that votes have been shifting all over the place, data's been moving by the hour, and for many, many hours this evening, they've been pretty unwilling to call it. Now, that has changed for one of the parties in the last sort of half an hour or so. The Liberal Democrats think they have a steer on where this might be going, and I've got Christine Jardine with me, the Liberal Democrat MP. What are your party sources telling you?
What I'm hearing is that we think that the Labour Party will win this evening, but that the votes that we have gained, because we've doubled our share of the votes that we have gained from the Conservatives have helped the Labour Party get over the line. And what we've seen tonight is a collapse in the Conservative vote, many of which came to us and allowed that to happen.
Labour sources here are quite angry at the suggestion that you've helped them get over the line. They say that you've been trying your hardest to take votes off them for weeks, and they've been quite critical of the way that they say you've been attacking them.
I'm astonished at that. You'd think they would just be pleased that they had won. And that's,
we should say they haven't said yet that they think they have.
Well, they haven't said yet, but you would think that they would be pleased that, the first thing I would do actually is, if they've won, is congratulate them. And I think that's the important thing. What we should be looking at is what the voters here have said. And we think what the voters have said is that they are not happy with this Conservative government, that they feel let down, like we have heard in other by-elections up and down the country. They're unhappy, they want a change, and they've made that quite clear tonight. I think that's the important thing. And I think, petty infighting between the parties is not what voters want to hear. They want to hear that we're listening to them and that we get it and that they're not happy, and we know that.
But at the very start of this campaign, way back in June, before the campaign was even official, the Lib Dems, you thought you could win this, didn't you? This is your kind of place, according to the places you're targeting. It's a commuter belt, it's rural, there are villages. It's the kind of place that really you thought would be your kind of place. Have you lost your by-election touch?
No, not at all. Mid Beds is a very different constituency. John Curtis said that it's unique. It's a different mix of people. It's got big towns. It's not an entirely rural constituency. It's a mixture of urban and rural. And so that made it a very difficult place to predict, a very difficult place to win for us. And it was a massive mountain that we had to climb.
But you have managed that in other places. If you think back to Tiverton and Honiton, North Shropshire, you've come from third in those places to take it. So why didn't it work for you this time?
Well, as I was saying, this is a different constituency. It's a constituency which has got more of an urban mix than they do, and a stronger Labour vote. And we were coming from third place. It was a massive majority to overcome. So we are very pleased that we've doubled our vote and that we've helped change. Here, we believe that the Conservatives have lost their seat, and we have been instrumental in helping the Labour Party to do that. And I think that, in a way, points the way ahead for the general election, that, we can be, individual parties working hard, but that people will vote the way they want to vote. And the way they want to vote is not Conservative at the moment.
And what have you learned, do you think, from this campaign for the Liberal Democrats in a general election?
Oh, I think we've learned that people are unhappy with the Conservatives.
But beyond that, I think we knew that before, didn't we?
Well, we did, but did they continue to be unhappy? Were they happy in, different parts of the country? And that the dissatisfaction with the level of GP availability, with the state of our rivers, with the state of the NHS, with the state of public services in rural areas and up and down the country. People are unhappy with that, and they like what we have to say. This is a seat where we didn't have much of a presence, but we have won more votes than we had. We've doubled our votes. It's an area where we have a big influence on the council. So what we've learned tonight is that we have a huge influence in British politics going forward, and that people want us to have that influence.
Is there a little bit of you that's disappointed that you haven't done it this time, though?
There's always a little bit of me that's disappointed if we don't. I would like to win every seat, but that's not possible. And I think what I take from this is that, there is a willingness out there amongst the Conservative voters to vote Liberal Democrat.
Christine Jardine, thank you very much. Well, we still don't have that result in. We're expecting it, or they're certainly aiming for the result to come through sometime between about 1:20 and 2 this morning. I don't think that's changed, so we will wait to see whether this hunch is correct.
Helen Catt, thank you very much. Well, interesting. Well, we might have a result in the next half an hour or so, which is promising. Let's talk to Sir John Curtis and pick up on some of those points. So a 44% turnout for Mid Bedfordshire, which isn't bad. I don't know if you could hear any of that interview. It sounded a little bit like Christine Jardine, the Liberal Democrat MP, sort of saying, we haven't got this, but we've helped Labour get it, which is very generous of them. What did you make of that?
Well, let me just pick up the turnout first. We should bear in mind that the turnout back in 2019 was around 10 points higher in Mid Bedfordshire than it was in Tamworth. And if you actually look at the change in turnout, down 34 points in Mid Bedfordshire, it's not that different from the 38-point drop in Tamworth. Now, a couple of things that we might want to say about in the wake of this. The truth is, it's looking as though that the fall in turnout in by-elections in this Parliament is going to be higher than it has been in any previous post-war Parliament. It's now running at around, on average, at a drop of 28 points. The last time we had really very precipitate drops in turnout was the Parliament of 1997 to 2001, at the end of which we had turnout in the general election of less than 60%. So I think there certainly is a warning here to our politicians that the voters are indeed not at the moment particularly encouraged to turn out and vote. But just in case the Conservative Party are saying, well, hang on, that therefore means they're going to come back to us, we should also say that there was actually, on average, a 24-point drop in turnout in the 92 to 97 Parliament, and I don't need to remind Conservative politicians what happened at the end of that. But I think the truth is, the public now, really ever since 1997, they've got more difficult to get to the polls. And now, of course, it may be that voters are apathetic. They may be that they're trusting. It may be they're not enthused about Labour. But of course, what's also true at the moment, and it's very similar to what was the position between 1997 and 2001, the fact that the Conservative Party has perhaps moved a bit more towards the centre. The Labour Party certainly has. So therefore, probably quite a lot of voters are now saying to themselves, not quite sure it makes much difference which of them wins. That's point one. Point two, with the opinion polls saying Labour are so far ahead, probably some voters are also saying to themselves, and by the way, it's pretty obvious who's going to win anyway. That certainly is historically a reason as why a turnout can go down. Now, the Liberal Democrats in Mid Bedfordshire. Well, I mean, the cephalological evidence that would support Christine Jardin's argument does come from what was a relatively small Survation poll done now some weeks ago, which suggested that amongst those Conservative voters who were actually going to vote for a different party, that more of them are going to the Liberal Democrats than they were going to the Labour Party. So I think that's probably what they will point to. But I think there's something else about what Christine Jardine says that really tells us about how the Liberal Democrats view the next election. Basically, the Democrats are betting the farm that the decline in Conservative support is indeed going to go all the way through to the general election. And because there are at least a significant number of constituencies where it is the Liberal Democrats and not Labour who are best placed to win, that will enable the Liberal Democrats to significantly increase their parliamentary representation and indeed perhaps, given the difficulties of the SNP at the moment, reclaim the position of third place. But we should also bear in mind that the Liberal Democrats, their signal failure in this Parliament, given they have frankly secured some quite spectacular victories in Somerset North, in Shropshire North and in Somerton and Frome and in Tiverton, is they've never managed in this Parliament to increase their national vote share in the polls above the 12% they got back in 2019. Yeah. And a key reason for that is that while, yes, they may be picking up votes from the Conservatives, they've been losing them to the Labour Party.
Well, that's interesting because let's just show the October polling averages for the parties. 28% Conservatives, 16 points ahead, 44% for Labour. And as you said, well, 12%, 11% in this polling average for the Liberal Democrats. And that has been fairly static, hasn't it, for some time?
Yeah, I mean, the Liberal Democrats have never been above 12%, which they got back in 2019 at any point in this Parliament. And to that extent, at least, they are doing no more than treading water. And if you look at what's going on underneath, basically they've been losing votes to Labour, including people who voted Remain in 2016 and who say they would vote to get out now. So they've not managed to hang on to a significant chunk of their Remain/Rejoin inclined electorate. Yes, they've picked up some Leave voters, but at the end of the day, they've just not made overall progress. So they're basically hoping to increase their parliamentary representation on what, at the moment at least, is little more than what they got back in 2019. And therefore, that bigger project that at some point the Liberal Democrats will need to try to tackle if they're going to get back to being the significant player they were up to and including 2010, that is looking like a party that can get 20% of the vote rather than something closer to 10% of the vote. That is a project on which the Liberal Democrats have failed in this Parliament to make any significant progress at all.
All right, Sir John Curtis, thank you very much. I think we can look at the pictures at the Mid Bedfordshire count. People gathering is always a sign, not definitively so, but a sign that we might be getting closer to a result. You can see the counting is still going on, but if it's anything between 1:20 and 2 o'clock, we will be keeping an eye across that because the candidates get called to the podium and we'll hear from the returning officer. But while we keep an eye on that shot, perhaps in the corner of our screen, I'd quite like to have a look at the leader approval ratings because we just talked about the polling averages for October for the parties. Andrew, that minus 24% for Rishi Sunak, not wanting to continually press the bruise, but Rishi Sunak did say, you know, he would be different. It would be change with Rishi Sunak, and yet that has been persistently poor in terms of his leader approval ratings, obviously way behind Keir Starmer now. Why is that? Why is he not making a difference?
I'd say Keir Starmer isn't exactly stellar.
Well, I'll come on to that.
He wants to be
that's why Bridget's
leader
here.
of the next government.
Yeah, I'll take that point. But why has Rishi not managed to sort of cut through, change the dial, move the dial for the Conservatives?
Because, you know, he is having to, rightly so, take some very difficult decisions to rebuild the economy from the global economic situation that we found ourselves as a result of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, to rebuild trust in the government, which we know was lacking following what happened last year.
He was, of course, in these governments, wasn't he? And as Chancellor.
And move the country forward. And as a result of that, some difficult decisions have had to be taken. And you know, of course, we need to re-earn the trust of the British people as we go towards that general election. But I firmly believe that as the result of these decisions that he's taken comes into force, as we see inflation move towards the target that we want, as we see all of our other priorities starting to be delivered upon, people will recognise that he is the leader, we are the party that have the answers to take this country forward into the next years of the 21st century. Frankly, we've heard nothing from the Labour Party, and what we're hearing tonight is that people are not enthused by Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, and we're hearing from the Liberal Democrats that, you know, they are now enablers for a Labour government. So, I mean, there is absolutely out there.
Although that makes it difficult for you, doesn't it? If you've got Liberal Democrats in some of those southern seats, that safe Conservative seats, and you've got the Labour Party taking back seats in the former Red Wall, perhaps to be regained.
It's difficult, right? We've been in power for 13 years. It is difficult, and we've got to go out there and re-earn the British people's trust. But we're determined to do that, and we're determined to do that whilst taking the long-term decisions that are going to benefit this country. That's what we're doing right now.
Plus 1%. That's quite recent, actually, that it's gone into positive figures, Bridget. I mean, that is disappointing, isn't it, when you think about everything that these Conservative governments since 2010 have had to deal with, whether it is the financial difficulties, the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and Keir Starmer's just 1% in positive.
Well, of course, we always want things to be better, but I think if you look to where we were in 2019 and where we are now, Keir Starmer has absolutely transformed the Labour Party, and that's why we're winning the support of Conservative voters, why, if we'd been having this conversation back in 2019, you would have thought it inexplicable that the Labour Party would have turned things around. That's down to Keir Starmer. We're looking outwards to the country. We're determined to create a more positive future for Britain.
But that's the problem, isn't it? He has transformed the party. I mean, I think most people would agree with that. But he hasn't captured the imagination, has he? Not at plus 1%, with the public at large.
Look, we're never complacent about that. And as I say, back in 2019, we suffered a devastating defeat. The fact we're even talking about the prospect tonight of historic wins for Labour in seats that are very, very strong Conservative seats, I think is testament to just how much progress we've made. But, you know, we haven't, you know, polls are a snapshot in time. There's a lot more that we still need to do. No, you know, the only poll that matters is, you know, when people cast their votes come the next general election.
Is it very problematic, that minus 24%? Is that going to change, really, over time for Rishi Sunak? Having promised to be different, it's very difficult for him to do that and be a change candidate when he is another Conservative Prime Minister who served under previous Prime Ministers, not Liz Truss, but Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clearly problematic because when Rishi Sunak first came into number 10, the argument you'd hear from those around him, I think it was said at the Tory MPOA day, was this is going to be like 1992. And it would be a John Major type moment where you had a younger leader come in and therefore Rishi Sunak would raise the Tories polling and that would be how he would fix it. Instead, yes, the polls have improved since Liz Truss, and I think it's worth pointing that out in terms of the Tory party's standing. Well, but I think people would have hoped it would have... exactly, right? And they would have hoped to move on. But really what seems to have happened is rather than Rishi Sunak raising the Tory poll rating, it feels as though the Tory poll rating has dragged Rishi Sunak's down with it. And I think that is not the conversations that you were having a few months ago. In terms of what it means in a general election, I think in a way, probably it's less the hope that Rishi Sunak's going to suddenly have this massive transformation going to the positive. It's more, can the Tories bring down Keir Starmer's? We know they want to attack Keir Starmer as a flip-flopper, have all these things in an election campaign. And therefore, you know, you'll hear about the positive vision, but I think that's probably more realistically where the Tories might think they can really whittle down a poll lead in an election campaign.
I mean, what do you think then about Keir Starmer, +1? I mean, if that is going to be the strategy from the Conservatives, and it's true, I mean, he hasn't held any of the pledges or held on to any of the pledges, Keir Starmer, that he made during the leadership campaign, and he'll say things have changed too. Does that matter?
Well, I think you look at Rishi Sunak, here's someone who, as we remember at the 2019 manifesto, stood on that manifesto which said that they weren't going to raise national insurance. And surprise, surprise, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he put up everyone's national insurance. So for the Tories to always say, oh, Keir Starmer's the flip-flopper, I think that is a bit rich. But I think Keir Starmer, clearly, you look at those numbers, they aren't incredible numbers. But speaking to one of Bridget's colleagues at Labour conference, they were saying voters don't need to love Keir Starmer, they just need to vote for him. And I think after today, if you see that they have turned around these huge Tory majorities and have won them, then clearly that does show that voters are willing to vote for Keir Starmer, and whatever mud the Tories throw at him, they do not see him as this dangerous prospect, which they did with former Labour leaders, i.e. Jeremy Corbyn.
Right, I mean, Ed Davey, -4%, and obviously taking what Sir John Curtis was saying, that you haven't been able to break through the sort of 12% polling in general. But what is clear is that Ed Davey is aligning himself politically, certainly, with Labour and wants the Tories out. That is broadly the strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, we make no bones about that. No. I mean, just to respond to what some of Sir John was saying there, I mean, I think vote share and the amount of vote share the Liberal Democrats get doesn't actually bear a huge amount of relationship to the seats that we win. So in 2017, we got 8%. We got 12 members of Parliament at that election. 2019, we got 12% and 11 members of Parliament. So, you know, our focus is much more on winning seats, and we're very focused on those seats that we think we can win. The vast majority of them are currently held by the Tories, and we are we are focusing our resources on winning those seats. And Sir John's right, we do have an ambition to be the third party in Parliament again. That's absolutely what we would like to achieve at the next general election. And that's very much our goal, and we're focused on it. I mean,
just to pick up briefly on the more recent by-election, which was in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which Labour won. They were obviously delighted about it because of the implications that might mean that the SNP will struggle to reach the dizzying heights they have in recent general elections. And although the swing was far less than would have to happen this evening for Labour to win, again, if they do well in Scotland, Labour, they won't need to do as well in seats like these in England.
No, it makes it a lot easier. And we know that Labour obviously used to have an awful lot of MPs in Scotland pre-2014. And then the 2015 election came along and the SNP won them all apart from 3 of them. And clearly Labour are hoping that this is the signs of rebuilding, because they know if they can pick up 12, maybe 20 seats in Scotland, it makes the job a lot easier in the rest of the country.
Well, let's talk about housing, because one of the things that Rishi Sunak didn't talk about, Andrew Bowie, in his conference speech was housing. It was Keir Starmer's sort of centre and front of the speech. And for the Liberal Democrats, it's been slightly awkward on the issue of housing, or certainly housing targets. And yet, it could be transformative, this issue, and Conservatives have failed over the 13 years to really increase the level and the numbers of housing built. Why didn't you make, or why didn't Rishi Sunak make that front and centre? It would be important in these by-elections.
Well, we've pledged to build more houses. In fact, actually, talking about Keir Starmer and flip-flopping, he actually ordered his Labour members of the House of Lords to vote against measures that would allow house builders and local authorities across the country to actually build much more of the housing that this country needs.
But you've dropped the targets, pretty well dropped the housing targets that would have ensured certain numbers of houses would be built on local authorities.
I think if you look across the country, the local authorities have actually delivered, and the areas of the country that have actually delivered more housing stock for the people that need it are actually under Conservative control. We've got a very proud record, and which I'm very proud to defend, of our record when it comes to house building. Yes, we need to do more. Yes, we have got a shortage of housing, and yes, we will do more. But Labour, Keir Starmer stands on stage at Labour Party conference and claims he wants to build more houses, when a week before he orders his members of the House of Lords to actually vote against the changes to nutrient neutrality, which would actually allow more of these houses to actually be built. We can't trust a thing Keir Starmer says on anything.
Well, Bridget, we'll answer this point. I mean, Labour Lords did vote against what would be watering down, you might say, some environmental standards to build 100,000 homes. Why?
Because we didn't think that was the right approach. It's Rishi Sunak who's in hock to his own backbenchers. That's why he's reneged on his targets and he isn't prepared to do what's right by the country. Keir Starmer's been clear we need to get more houses built. We'll change the planning system. We'll deliver a generation of new towns and we'll deliver 1.5 million new homes over the course of 5 years. So we're focused... Not because we're focused on how you actually make it happen. That's not the answer.
We could have made it happen. You could help us make it happen, but because of your...
Look, I know you want to make it all about Keir Starmer. You're in government. You scrapped your own targets.
You want to make it all about Keir Starmer. You want him to be Prime Minister. We've got to talk about Keir Starmer.
We have got a really great plan for how we get more houses built in our country. That is a really big national priority and one where the Conservatives have failed.
But you could help us
do it now. You were asking about what Labour would do differently. If we were to deliver this scale of housing right across our country, that would make a massive contribution to growth in our country too, in terms of
delivery is the
jobs,
problem, Bridget.
the skills, the apprenticeships that we could create coming out of that, alongside the very real and pressing need in terms of what families want to see. The only contribution the Tories have made to housing in the last year is to push up people's mortgage bills with that reckless budget that Liz Truss delivered, and everyone is going to be paying more year after year after year because of the Conservatives, and people won't forget that.
Right. No, what people might remember, though, is that Keir Starmer, yes, I mean, he set out a very ambitious policy, and we will judge him on delivery if you win the election next year, because delivery when it comes to planning reform and housing is not easy, as we've seen, with the Conservatives' failure to do so.
Well, it's not easy if you give it kind of just dig into your own backbenches.
Right? And you're saying you're not going to do that. You're going to ignore new MPs, new Labour MPs this evening. Let's say they win in Mid Bedfordshire and Tamworth, and they say we're not building whole new estates in these areas. Local people don't want them. You're going to ignore them.
Keir Starmer has made it abundantly clear that we will press ahead and we will make sure that housing development happens. Alongside that, though, what we do need to see is good infrastructure, good local services and good green spaces alongside that.
We can get on building those houses now, but you've
had 13 years, Andrew, for goodness sake. Like, take some responsibility. Come on.
On an 80-seat majority. You've got a majority, you're in government, and you failed to build the houses that are needed. Imagine what it would be like at the next election if somehow you cling to power, but with a reduced majority. There's no way you're going to be able to build enough houses.
We've set out exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to build the houses. It's Labour members of the House of Lords under order from Keir Starmer.
You're in government.
Not in the House of Lords. We don't have a majority, and we'll be dealing with the bill when it comes back in front of the House of Commons.
Why did you scrap your targets?
Look, we are determined to build more houses. The houses of the country needs, in the parts of the country that these houses are required. We're going to press on and start delivering it, despite the opposition from Labour unelected members of the House of Lords, preventing us getting on and building the houses.
It's always somebody else's fault.
Well, let me come to Sarah, because I said, I'll come back to Andrew and the Conservatives in a moment in terms of housing and promises on housing. But Sarah, it was interesting at your conference, because you're the only party that actually takes on board motions that are passed at conference by party members. It's a novel idea, clearly, because Labour and the Tories don't do that anymore. And they actually forced you to keep your target, which you were going to abandon. Why were you going to abandon your quite ambitious, the most ambitious target of about 380,000 new homes a year?
Well, you know, we're really proud to be a democratic party, and policy is made at conference and it's made by the members. And I think the important thing to say about that was in the context of a policy paper that had been drafted by lots of different parts of the party over a number of years. A 60-page policy paper, and it was looking at the whole issue of housing. And it was a really, really good piece of work, actually. And
Do
we
you
had a
want
really
more houses
good
or don't you?
debate about it. Of course we want more houses. We
Right.
need more houses, and particularly we need more social housing. And that is actually at the very heart of what our policy paper says. You know, our particular commitment is around 150,000 new social houses a year, and that is the need that is most desperately required. And what we find, one of the weaknesses of the way we approach housing at the moment is it's a developer's charter. Everything is built by the private sector, and they can manipulate the market, and that, you know, really plays into their hands. And if we want housing for local people that really works for local communities, A, we need more social housing, but B, we do need more local control over what goes where, how it's built, and the facilities it service.
I mean, Liberal Democrat members were right. Well, you do need targets. Otherwise, you can't almost force people to build new homes. There'll always be a problem. I mean, we always talk to MPs who say yes to more homes when they're sitting here at a national level, and then we find there are planning applications that they have signed up to that say, not here, not in our backyard.
I think it's very interesting to hear Sarah talk about the Liberal Democrats' commitment to building new houses. It's going to come as a bit of a shock to the people of Chesham and Amersham or Somerset and Frome, where the Liberal Democrat campaign was based wholly upon opposition to new building, new housing or new infrastructure being built in and around those communities. Look, we are determined we're going to build the houses of the future. We have a plan to do it. It's being prevented right now in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords.
Put that aside, generally... Well, because actually we had the former Levelling Up Minister, or Secretary of State, I should say, Simon Clarke. He was sitting here in the studio and he said the Conservatives need a much more ambitious housing policy. The government should aim to build 300 to 500,000 homes every year. He came close to saying, I agree with Keir Starmer's ambitious policy on housing. He doesn't think his own party is serious enough about it.
I'd be amazed if Simon Clarke was to agree on Keir Starmer on anything. But look, we recognise we need to build more houses. We've got a plan to do that, and we're going to press on and build them if we get the support from the Labour Party in Parliament to do so. Right now, they're preventing us getting on and building them.
Right, well, it's going to be difficult, though. Even if Labour win, even though the rhetoric is strong, we're going to bulldoze through planning for reform. We're going to ignore local communities. Really? When it comes to building homes? Or do you think he is being sort of bullish and true about it?
Well, I think the language from Keir Starmer is interesting, which is he is going to face down his own MPs. Angela Rayner saying similar. But you do go back to the 2019 election, and Boris Johnson promised, you know, the most radical shake-up of planning reforms, won a majority of 80, and yet backtracked because he had opposition from his MPs. Now, you can say the Labour Party could be more well-behaved. They've obviously had very careful candidate selection to try and prevent some of the problems you've seen with the 2019 intake. But at the same time, I don't think planning objections are unique only to Tory MPs. Labour will face, I think, some resistance, particularly in some of the seats they hope to win. And therefore, there is just a question about the way in which Keir Starmer can face them down. And it always comes down to, you know, what is the scale of a Labour win, if there is a Labour win? Of course. You know, if you can say you're going to face down your MPs, and if you have the big majority the current polls suggest, I think you could have confidence that Keir Starmer has the will and could do it. If, you know, given there is actually, you know, a huge number of seats Labour need to win because of where they're starting from, you had a situation where Labour had a majority of, say, 15, it suddenly gets a lot harder if you have some MPs looking at their seats. So I think there's a lot of hypotheticals, which means it's quite hard to say. You can say, yes, Keir Starmer has the will, they have a plan, but then you press on where exactly are these new towns going to be? You don't quite know what the parliamentary arithmetic is going to be. Will there be some Tory MPs, say Simon Clarke's, in the Commons that would lend a vote to help Keir Starmer potentially? But I think it does just mean it's hard to say it's definitely going to happen right now.
Well, if we show, actually, key issues for voters, we talked about the economy, it's at the top, that's unsurprising. Housing is actually a little way down, and bearing in mind Keir Starmer did make it front and centre, and, you know, there are Conservatives, younger Conservatives, like Andrew Bowie, who do think it's important for future generations of Conservative voters. Are you surprised to see it is a little bit lower down than health and immigration and so on?
I mean, potentially, but we obviously know at the moment the economy is front and centre because loads of people are struggling. People on good salaries are finding it hard to make ends meet because of what's happened over the last couple of years. But I think it is going to be a tricky job for Keir Starmer. At the Labour Party conference, he said he wanted to build 1.5 million houses over the 5 years of next Parliament. That's tricky. You are going to have to do things, like he suggested, saying hand in hand, we're going to build more houses, but also going to make sure there's GP surgeries and schools to come along with it to kind of ease some of those pressures on local communities.
Right, well, we'll come back to some of the other issues a little later on, but I think we can join Ione Wells in Tamworth and find out how they're getting on there with the counting.
Evening, Joe. Well, last time we spoke, we had just got that turnout figure, 35.9% of the electorate turning out to vote in Tamworth today. Not a very high turnout. That was something that both parties were expecting. You can probably see behind me the ballot papers are starting to pile up, different coloured clips for different parties as they're all being counted. And interestingly, as the evening's gone on, it's gone from being a sort of muted reaction, I think, from both parties to certainly a lot more optimism from Labour. One observer here who's been at many elections has told me that certainly seeing more red than usual. Joining me now is the Labour MP Stephanie Peacock, who we can talk through some of these observations with. Is that the impression that you're getting?
It's certainly looking encouraging, yes, for tonight. And obviously, if we do manage to win, it will be an historic night for the Labour Party.
And what is it that's driving this optimism? Labour seem to go into this certainly managing expectations, not wanting to get people's hopes up. Why the change now?
Well, of course, because it's a 20,000 Conservative majority. It is the biggest majority they are defending this Parliament. So the fact that we're even on the pitch in this election is quite extraordinary.
And is there anything particular that you've seen tonight from conversations, from papers you've been watching pile up? What's giving you a sort of optimism now at this stage in the night?
Well, we've been talking to voters week in, week out, and people have been very clear they are fed up with this government and they want to send a very clear message to them.
Turnout is low. What do you think is behind that?
I think that is inevitable with by-elections, and actually if you look at the turnout at general elections in Tamworth, it does tend to have a lower turnout than the national average.
And do you think, I mean, Labour certainly, from speaking to figures in the party over the last couple of weeks, has been concerned that while there hasn't been enthusiasm for the Conservatives, not much enthusiasm for the alternative. What do you think there's a problem there for Labour?
I've certainly seen an enthusiasm in Tamworth, and actually if we manage to win this tonight, that means that Conservative voters have come out but they voted Labour, because the majority is so big and the swing is so big, they need to have switched to us for us to win.
What kind of issues were people raising with you? Why do you think there has been this apathy on the doorstep?
Well, I'm not sure there's been an apathy. I think people are very fed up with the government and they're really struggling with the cost of living crisis, and they don't feel that this government's on their side.
In terms of kind of tonight, though, what would be a good result for Labour? Are you feeling confident now that you've won it? You've done it?
A good result would be a win. I mean, we don't need to win Tamworth to win the general election. You know, the road to a Labour government does not run through Tamworth. It does run through the West Midlands. So if we've won tonight, that's a very, very good sign.
Now, the Conservatives, who we were speaking to earlier, said they didn't pick up much enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. That was something that was kind of giving them optimism, that while there might be a bit of apathy on their side, not much enthusiasm for the opposition. Do you think they have a point?
No, I don't think they do. We had Keir here last Friday and he got a great reception. He was out and about talking to voters at a local community centre and at a school. And I think throughout this campaign, Labour have put forward a positive vision for Tamworth. We've got a strong candidate in Sarah who is committed to working hard for the town. And let's not forget, they've not had an MP here for over a year.
What kind of issues, whether they're local, national, were people raising with you in particular that you think is driving this change that you think is coming potentially?
Well, everything from the cost of living, the state of the economy, the fact the government crashed the economy. People are really, really struggling. But much more local issues like potholes, for example. You know, the budget has been cut by the local councils significantly. It's things that affect people's everyday lives, and they just feel let down by the government. And they've looked at Labour and they've looked at our positive plan. And I think in Sarah, they can see a strong champion.
Stephanie Peacock, thank you for talking to us tonight. I'm sure we'll talk to you again as the evening goes on. So certainly smiles, I think, from the Labour camp this evening. Now, clearly, there's still potentially another hour, 2 hours to go before we have a sense of the result here. But certainly, as I say, there has been an increased optimism from Labour's camp now compared to a couple of hours ago.
Well, interesting. Hints of possible success. Ione Wells there in Tamworth. Let's go back to some of the issues that no doubt people are talking about on the doorstep, and one of them will be the NHS. And Andrew, there's no doubt that Conservative governments have put record amounts of money into the NHS, although the increase in that has slowed right down. And as a result, we've obviously got strikes ongoing with junior doctors and consultants, the problems for people getting a GP appointment. Is it time, in people's minds, that someone else needs to have a go at fixing the NHS?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, you're absolutely right, Joe. We have invested record amounts in the National Health Service.
We have record waiting lists.
But we recognise there are issues with the Health Service, which is why the Prime Minister set out as one of his top 5 priorities his desire to cut waiting lists and to make access to the services that people need even better than they are at the minute. It is incredibly frustrating that junior doctors and consultants continue to go on strike. That is frustrating our efforts to deliver for the British people the health service that they frankly deserve. We have offered significant wage increases and packages which we think are fair and balanced, and unfortunately the junior doctors and consultants have not agreed to them.
So is it time for someone else? Is it time for someone else, another party?
No,
because there's been consistent, you could argue, failure by the Conservatives, not just over strikes, but to get the waiting list down, to sort out GP appointments. And part of that, according to the King's Fund, is because we don't spend enough per person on healthcare compared to other similar countries.
Record amounts, Joe.
No, but I said that record amounts. But we have an ageing population, and an ageing population that is putting pressure on a health service, and the rate of increase in money going into the NHS has slowed significantly under Conservative governments, and it's clearly not keeping pace.
Well, look, every health service within the United Kingdom, because we do live in a situation where health has devolved, has been struggling and has been rebuilding post-COVID with all the pressures that has brought to bear. We are taking action now, we believe, that will result in shorter waiting lists in the long term. We believe that our offers to junior doctors and to consultants are fair and balanced. And if they get back to work and start delivering for the British people that they serve, then I do genuinely believe that the health service will begin to be transformed. But as you said, we've been investing record amounts in the health service, and prior to COVID,
it's not working,
COVID, waiting lists were coming down considerably.
Yeah, but because the Conservatives, been putting these record amounts of money into the health service, and we still don't have the outcomes that most people in this country would like to see, and you're not pledging any more money, just reform, how are you going to improve the National Health Service dramatically?
Look, a Labour government, if we were to form the next government, isn't going to be able to wave a magic wand and fix 13 years of Conservative failure on the NHS.
So you'll still have strikes, waiting lists and so on.
Last time Labour was in government, we had record patient satisfaction. We dealt with the waiting list that we inherited from the last Conservative government, and we made sure that people could see a GP quickly. All of that has gone over the last 13 years.
But you put up taxes to do that, and you don't want to do that either.
We've seen the highest tax burden on working people in 70 years under the Conservatives.
But you're not going to put them up anymore.
We don't want working people to be paying more and more in taxes as they currently are under the Conservatives.
That is how you achieved, in part, the success, as you put it, of last time.
How we achieved it last time around was by growing our economy and being able to invest in our public services, which is what we did consistently over those 13 years. What people are experiencing right now is a failure to be able to access a GP appointment in a timely fashion. That then costs more because people end up in A&E, or they end up, things get more serious, and situations develop, health conditions worsen. And the fact that so many people are waiting longer and longer, even where it comes to cancer scans and diagnosis.
How's reform going to change that? I mean, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, says time and time again it can't be about money. Keir Starmer said the same. There's going to be no chequebook being waved around on any of the public services. OK, well, that's clear. But I'm not sure I can see an improved National Health Service on the basis of just reform.
So what Labour set out at our conference just a fortnight ago was better access to dental appointments, better support for children around dentistry.
How?
By ending the non-dom tax status, we'll invest that money in better NHS services, cutting waiting lists, a plan to cut waiting lists.
All with the same $3 billion?
Absolutely, a plan to invest in technology, a plan to make sure people have got access to dental appointments more quickly, and that particularly children...
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting, isn't it, that $3 billion?
It's a lot of heavy lifting,
Well, it's a lot of money. I tell you what, OK, so you think it's fine then, the non-dom tax status? You think that's OK, just carry on as is? When instead you can invest that money in the NHS.
The question here is about the NHS and how you're going to reform it. And
I've just said how we're going to reform it.
I think you've spent your reforms to non-dom tax status about 5 times
we haven't.
over the last 3 minutes.
That's untrue. No, it's all fully funded and fully costed.
It's not.
No, it is. Absolutely it is. I'll send you that if you want to see it. But on the non-dom tax status, why don't you end it and spend that money on the NHS?
Look, what we're committed to doing is growing our economy, reducing inflation, ensuring that we have the space in which we can invest even more in the NHS. We're very proud of our record in investing record amounts into the National Health Service. We have done since 2010, and we're going to continue to do so as we move forward and work with those professionals within the NHS to get them back to work and delivering for the British people. That's what we're determined to do, and we're very proud of our record so far in doing it.
So you think it's OK that the global super rich get to choose where they pay their taxes rather than paying them here and investing in our public services?
I think that if you look at the tax situation all round, the richest in this country actually pay more than they ever have done at any point in history, and that's as a result of decisions taken by this government. We've listed the poorest in this country out of paying tax.
Working people are paying more than they've ever paid in a generation. I mean, more than a generation.
Well, what exactly are you going to do to change that?
Grow the economy.
Position? Grow the economy. OK, that's
which we did last time around.
But that could take years, Bridget, of course.
Well, I mean, we did it last.
All right, I'm going to
hang on a minute. Hang on.
I don't want to go back to
talk over each other.
When something bad happens globally, you refuse to accept any responsibility for domestic issues, yet you completely ignore the global financial crisis that took place pre-2010. You think that only affected Britain?
No, but we were affected far more than any
other
economy.
No, we were not.
Yes, we were.
All right, well, let's not do a history lesson because I'm going to talk to Sarah.
Garbage.
We'll leave the history lesson from the financial crash then in 2010. Sarah, Sir Ed Davey talked very passionately and emotionally about social care, the NHS and cancer care. And that was his one big sort of promise and commitment and pledge. Tell me again how you're going to do that.
Well, I mean, Ed, as you say, spoke about cancer care, particularly the death of his mother. This is why it matters so very much to him. You know, the way that the NHS is working it's not working at the moment for so many people on so many levels, as well as the pledge on cancer care. Our other commitment is that people should be able to see a GP within a week. So, I mean, we've got lots of plans for that. One of the most important things I think we need to be able to do is to look at our social care workforce, because so much of what's going on in the NHS is about not being able to discharge people from hospital because there's nowhere for them to go. So we're saying that what we want to do is to increase the national minimum wage by £2 for those in the social care workforce to start attracting people into that profession, because that's the absolute key challenge in social care.
And how will that transform outcomes in terms of cancer care?
So what we're saying is what we need to be doing is we need to be freeing up space in our hospitals, and we just need to make sure that people are moving out of hospital into the community and where they get the proper care, and then we can really focus our hospital resources on the people who really need acute care, which is particularly cancer patients.
I mean, John and Katie, but John, first of all, it's an intractable problem, is what a lot of people will think. These waiting lists, the difficulty of getting GP appointments in many parts of the country, and without more money or money and reform, it's not going to change that dramatically, whoever's in power.
No, but we know that one of the things that has been a problem for the government in bringing the waiting list down has been the NHS strikes that have dragged on and on and on. I remember we had the nurses' strike to start with. The government refused to get around the table. That dragged on forever. They wouldn't even hold any talks with them. Eventually, they gave in. They went around the table. They did the sensible thing. They managed to get a deal. And then we're now back going around the same circuit again with doctors, that they're saying we're not going to get around the table, we won't hold any negotiations with them. And so that is dragging on and on and on, and that has contributed to these waiting lists getting longer rather than shorter.
I mean, I suppose that the doctors and junior consultants are asking for a 35% pay rise. They want pay restoration from the pay that they've lost since 2010. Labour aren't going to restore that level of pay either, though, are they? So, I mean, we could still have those strikes under a Labour government who also, they might sit round the table and chat, but they're not going to put any more money on the table. They haven't said so yet, anyway.
But it's a negotiation. They have a starting point. Remember what the nurses were saying at the start, and that's not what they ended up with. They ended up with a sensible negotiation and came to a compromise. And clearly that's what also needs to happen with the doctors.
Katie?
Yeah, I just think it's notable that Labour won't get into what percentage they would offer, because they say, to John's point, well, we need to get round the table, which is obviously a convenient way of not going into the details. I think when it comes to the junior doctors, if you look at some of Wes Streeting's comments, he actually seems like he wants to have, not per se a fight for the sake of it, but he's saying some things that parts of the Labour Party, historically
more private sector involvement, although it was, of course, started under Tony Blair.
So I think it's hard to see with Rachel Reeves's message of fiscal discipline combined with Wes Streeting's approach when it comes to the BMA and junior doctors, that they're going to go near the 35% figure. So I think there is a world where you do keep having, some form of strikes. Probably the mood music would be better in a Labour government in the sense they have those relations with the unions. But right now we're in that period where the unions would rather have a Labour government than a Tory government, so being quite positive. I think once Labour are in power, they're going to be expecting things in return. So I don't think they're going to suddenly vanish, these strikes, when it comes to a Labour government. And actually, Rachel Reeves has staked so much now on how Labour is different when it comes to the economy. They don't have that much wiggle room in terms of things to do because both, Andrew and Bridget keep talking about growing the economy. Yeah. If your main way to grow the economy is planning reform, which clearly would get somewhere. You look at lots of studies, that's not something that's going to happen overnight. It could take several years before you really start to see the effects of that. So we could be heading to a period where not much changes very quickly.
Right. I think we're going to go back to Mid Bedfordshire before we go to the news at 2 o'clock. Helen Catt is there, and we're hoping that she's got the campaign organiser for Labour, Peter Carl. But anyway, Helen, over to you.
Hi, Joe. Yes, I do have Peter Carl with me. As you said, he's been running the campaign here in Mid Bedfordshire for Labour for quite a few months now, so I'll just bring him in. Peter, I'll start by asking you, look, we've been hearing from various sources this evening that they think you've won. Do you?
We don't know exactly what the result is yet, but it has been a good night for Labour, both here and in Tamworth. We know that this is only possible because Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. He has made sure that our missions programme for government is a credible one, which is being responded to across the country. We have the values that people associate with British values in vast ways of the country. And these are the things that have made this possible. We don't know what the result is yet, but it is very clear that Labour is doing very well.
And are you hopeful? We know we don't know yet, but...
Look, we have run a campaign that I am so proud of. Right from the day one, we came here and we listened very intently to people across Mid Bedfordshire. It was an unconventional by-election. I think other parties ran a very conventional by-election campaign. I think because of the skill of Labour Party staff and the imagination and creativity that they brought to this, the real confidence that Keir Starmer brought to this campaign, we ran a very unconventional campaign. We didn't attack any other parties in this. We realised that residents across Mid Bedfordshire had seen the worst of politics. We set about trying to show them the best. So we just set about making sure all of them understood that we had a candidate with character, decency and a hard-working ethic. We wanted everybody to get to know him. We wanted to show them that actually the Labour Party had the values, we had the policies, we had the politics, which actually represents what most people consider British values these days. And these things added up to a compelling alternative for voters here. We don't know what the result is yet, but it's very clear people have turned to us in very large numbers.
So if we get to, an hour's time and you do get over the line, what would that mean for Labour?
If we do, this was always a moonshot for us, this campaign. If we did win this, it would be the biggest by-election shock in history. So, of course, we put our heart and soul into it. We really thought creatively about how to campaign here, how to show the best of Keir Starmer's current Labour Party. If we did do it, it would be absolutely astonishing achievement, and it would show just how far we have come as a credible alternative to the Tory government. It would be a devastating blow to Rishi Sunak. Don't forget, just 2 weeks ago at his conference, he said he was having a restart, that his premiership was having a restart. He threw up a load of policies up into the air, and he chose a different direction in terms of policies. It would show that that is not working, and actually the Labour missions-driven programme for government is something that people are turning to.
I was saying that the Liberal Democrats are suggesting that if you do get over the line, it's partly going to be down to them massively increasing their vote share. They think they've doubled it, and that will help you cross the line.
One thing we have learned during this campaign is the Liberal Democrats don't know how to add up. They don't know how to do data. They don't know how to actually communicate about the numbers.
They do know they are good at by-elections, though, aren't they? They do know how to monitor a by-election.
Well, clearly, they're not good at by-elections because actually this would be the biggest by-election shock in history. A place that the Labour Party has never won in before. In fact, the Lib Dems hadn't either. This has only been a Conservative constituency in living memory. If this constituency has chosen to go directly from Conservative, where they have been for multi-generations, and gone directly directly to Keir Starmer's Labour Party, they wouldn't have needed to go via a third party. They wouldn't have needed to go for another political party. This contest was always between the Conservatives with Rishi Sunak, the Labour Party with Keir Starmer. We had a great candidate, a really creative campaign that showed the best of the current Labour Party, and it looks like people have responded to that really well. We don't know what the final result is yet, but if we do get over the line, it would be a political earthquake on the scale that we have never seen in this country, and it is down to having a magnetic alternative, a compelling alternative, a credible programme for government centrally, with a great locally rooted campaign, with a brilliant candidate, Alistair Strathern.
When you've been here for 4 months, what would it mean to you personally if he won tonight?
I've worked on one of the best teams I have ever had the opportunity to work on. All of the Labour staff have risen to the challenge. We came in here, we listened to the community, and I was proud to be there at the beginning there. And then whether you were running the digital team, whether it was the field operations, whether it was the strategic conversations we had about how to connect with this community, every single person rose to the challenge. And I've got to tell you, I've spoken to Keir Starmer many, many times through this campaign. He was really, really brave to really think that actually, and had to have the confidence to think that the Labour Party can go into Mid Bedfordshire, a 25,000 Conservative majority, and go there with confidence that actually his project to reorientate the Labour Party can connect that deeply into Tory territory. So right from the top of the party, right down through to people who are out there in the field and all of the volunteers and activists, because we set the one challenge for all of our activists. Imagine what it would take to get you to vote Tory, because that's what we were asking every single person to do, and make that journey right across Mid Bedfordshire, and we did it. They are doing it. We don't know if you've got across the line yet, but we've done very, very well tonight, and it's a credit to the whole party.
Peter Kyle, thank you very much. And we shouldn't have, we hope, too much longer, Joe, to wait. We're hoping for that result sometime in the next hour or so.
Thank you very much. Helen Catt talking there to Peter Kyle, who has run the campaign there, or been the coordinator in Mid Bedfordshire. It has been a long campaign. You can hear it in Peter Kyle's voice, but sounding bullish and confident, maybe because even if Labour don't win, Peter Kyle obviously thinks that they have taken significant enough numbers of votes from the Conservatives to show that they would be on some sort of trajectory in a part of the country that is not at all traditionally Labour. Let's just have a look at them counting in Mid Bedfordshire, since Helen Catt hopes that they might be getting close to a result. Well, the counting is still going on for the moment. It had been a three-way fight. It sounds now like it is down to Labour and the Conservatives. Will, of course, bring you that result as soon as we have it, sometime after 2 o'clock now. Just to remind you of the swing that is needed for Labour to win in Mid Bedfordshire. And as we say, this is a seat that's been Tory for nearly 100 years. You can see there they would have to get over 19% swing. Big swing, not as big, funnily enough, as in Tamworth, but Labour have had, or held, I should say, Tamworth, the seat in Staffordshire. They held it before 2010, but it's a bigger swing to take it off the Conservatives now. But just look at Mid Bedfordshire. Peter Kyle saying it would be historic. And yes, it would be in many ways, but not necessarily in terms of the swing, because in Selby and Ainsty in July, the by-election we covered then, they gained it with over 23% swing away from the Conservatives to them, and in Uxbridge and South Rice, a much smaller swing, the Conservatives held it, surprisingly for many people in July, but they held that seat. But there's no doubt that Labour has got those sorts of figures before. Hopefully we'll have not much longer to wait, but let's get the latest news headlines with Nikki Schiller.
Thanks, Joe. We start with the latest on the Israel-Gaza war. In the last hour, President Biden has delivered a televised speech on the US response to the Hamas attack on Israel. Mr. Biden said he will make an urgent budget request to Congress on Friday for military support to both Israel and Ukraine.
American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe. American values are what make us a partner that other nations want to work with. Put all that at risk if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. That's why tomorrow I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine.
There are signs that Israel is readying itself for a possible ground offensive in the Gaza Strip. Israel's defence minister has told troops on the border with Gaza that they will soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. The Israeli military has been readying itself for an expected ground incursion into the territory, whilst the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told other troops, "We will win." Jordan has said that it fears the worst from what's to come. The United Nations and aid agencies say lack of water, food, medicine and other essentials is making the situation for displaced people in Gaza increasingly desperate. Egyptian state media say the Rafah crossing into Gaza will be open for several hours later today to allow the delivery of supplies. Lorries are at the border, although aid agencies fear the first consignments will not be nearly enough. The UN says designated shelters are overcrowded, water cannot be pumped or filtered because of Israel's block on fuel, and bottled water is now unaffordable for most families. Rishi Sunak will continue his tour of the Middle East today amid growing fears in the region that the conflict in Gaza could spread. Key Arab leaders are gathering in Egypt ahead of a summit this weekend to discuss the crisis. In Saudi Arabia last night, the Prime Minister met the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Number 10 said the pair agreed the loss of innocent lives in Israel and Gaza over the last 2 weeks had been horrific. Mr Sunak's spokesman said he encouraged Saudi Arabia to use its influence to support stability in the Middle East. Here, as you've been hearing with Joe, votes continue to be counted in the Mid Bedfordshire and Tamworth by-elections. We could have declarations in the next hour. Turnout in Tamworth was 35.9%. That is low even for a by-election. The vote followed the resignation of the former Conservative Deputy Whip Chris Pincher in September. Our team in Tamworth say Labour figures are feeling pretty confident. Turnout in Mid Bedfordshire was 44%. The poll was triggered by the resignation of Nadine Dorries. The former Conservative Culture Secretary had a majority of nearly 25,000 in 2019. One senior Conservative there has told us it is too close to call. Well, our polling expert, Sir John Curtis, says the low turnout is a warning to the political parties.
Truth is, it's looking as though that the fall in turnout in by-elections in this Parliament is going to be higher than it has been in any previous post-war Parliament. It's now running at around, on average, at a drop of 28 points. The last time we had really very precipitate drops in turnout was the Parliament of 1997 to 2001, at the end of which we had turnout in the general election of less than 60%. So I think there certainly is a warning here to our politicians that the voters are indeed not at the moment particularly encouraged to turn out and vote. But just in case the Conservative Party are saying, well, hang on, that therefore means they're going to come back to us, we should also say that there was actually, on average, a 24-point drop in turnout in the 92 to 97 Parliament. And I don't need to remind Conservative politicians what happened at the end of that.
The body of a 57-year-old woman has been recovered from a river in Angus as Storm Babette sweeps across eastern Scotland. Hundreds of people have been told to leave their homes. A rare red weather warning is in force for Angus, Aberdeenshire and parts of Perthshire, which means there is a risk to life. While the focus is on the situation in eastern Scotland right now, there is also concern over the impact of rainfall expected to build up on the eastern side of the Pennines and Peak District, as well as parts of Greater Manchester, Cheshire and the Borders, with easterly winds piling rain into the area during the day. A Met Office amber warning comes into force from noon, with up to 120 millimetres of rain possible, with flooding and disruption likely. Finally, train passengers are facing another 6 months of potential strikes. It's after members of the RMT union voted to continue taking strike action in their dispute about pay, jobs and conditions. The dispute with rail companies has already been going on for nearly 18 months. There are, however, no fresh strike dates yet to be announced. I'll be back with an update later. Now back to Joe and our by-election special.
Yes, welcome back as we await the results from the two by-elections, one in Tamworth in Staffordshire and the other in Mid Bedfordshire. Both seats vacated by two Conservative MPs who stepped down in, well, slightly difficult circumstances, let's put it that way. We're hoping to get both results within the next hour or so, but for certainly the next few hours, we have Jonathan Ashworth, who has swapped places with Bridget Phillipson.
Hello.
For those, hello to you, Shadow Paymaster General. If you were looking at both these by-elections now, huge majorities for Conservatives in rock-solid Tory seats. Which one would you be more confident about for Labour?
Well, I've just got here, so what's the goss? Tell me what's going on.
You're supposed to tell me that. Well, we've just heard from Peter Kyle, who has led the campaign for the Labour Party in Mid Bedfordshire. He's sounding confident, but confident about taking lots of votes from the Conservatives, but whether it's enough to win, he couldn't be sure, of course, at this point.
Yeah.
And also a little bit of fury and frustration at the Liberal Democrats for deigning to take part in a by-election, which I think is their right, but might have prevented them having a clearer shot at victory.
Well, they're two very safe Conservative seats, aren't they? Very comfortable majorities for the Conservatives. So if they're in trouble there tonight, that raises serious questions for the Conservative government. Look, I think there is a yearning for change across the country. And I think that's pretty clear. And I think people who voted Conservative in recent elections are looking at the Labour Party afresh. And people who voted Conservative, I've got friends, I've got neighbours, I've got relations who have voted Conservative all their life. They think this Conservative Party have moved away from them.
Yeah, but have they fallen in love with Keir Starmer?
Well, let's see what happens in these election results this evening. I mean, these majorities are substantial.
They are.
And the swings that are needed to overtake them are quite significant.
Yeah.
But even if you don't take these seats, let's see what the swings are, because a lot of Conservative MPs will be watching this result tonight or waking up, and when they see the swings, they'll certainly be very nervous when they're crunching on their cornflakes.
Which one of the seats will tell us more about Labour's chances of winning the next election? Even if you don't win them, in terms of those swings, which one, Tamworth or Mid Bedfordshire, will be more indicative of where Labour is in terms of recovery?
I'm not going to choose a seat in that respect. They're two very important constituencies. They're two very important by-elections that we've been fighting very hard in both of them. They're both of huge significance. But let's see what the actual results are. But I think in both constituencies, it is clear to me that Conservatives feel that this Conservative government has moved away from them, and they are looking at the Labour Party, and they're looking about the change message that Keir Starmer has been articulating to the country.
I mean, Andrew Bowie, is true. I mean, if, let's say, Labour does win, I know we are speculating, but if they have taken as many seats, votes away from Conservatives in these two seats, people will be nervous. Tory MPs in safe seats will begin to get nervous at this point. There'll be more pressure on Rishi Sunak because everything will be up for grabs at the general election.
Joe, not wanting to repeat myself.
Well, don't. Don't repeat yourself. Say something about how Conservative MPs in safe seats will feel, particularly with these two, if Labour have made such big inroads. And you win them, but they've made big inroads.
Colleagues of mine will be looking at this in the same way we look at every by-election. As a government who have been in power for 13 years, it's very difficult. Governments don't win by-elections, and we know that there is a reluctance.
Well, actually, you did. Well, you held one. You held the Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
Interestingly, yes, absolutely. When there was a by-election fought on a position of principle, when it was a Conservative view of how we should proceed versus a Labour view.
Watering down your net zero commitments.
Labour, we've not watered down any net zero commitments, remained committed
we'll come to those
2050.
In a minute. Okay,
we'd be very happy to come to those in a minute. But look, these are by-elections, mid-term, in a period where people are sceptical and are looking at the government to deliver the change that they need. They are not sold on the Labour Party. We know we've got to work hard to win the trust of the British people back over again, and we're going to do that. That's why we're focused, whatever the result tonight, we're going to be focused on delivering for the British people, delivering on those priorities as set out by the Prime Minister, and taking those tough decisions to build a brighter future for the UK, which is what people expect us to.
Well, Andrew's right. By-elections aren't the same, clearly. as general election. No. They are historically used as a chance for voters to protest against the incumbents, against the government of the day, and the Tories have been in power for 13 years. I could put the question another way then to you. If you don't take these 2 seats when you've been consistently ahead in the polls by anything between 16 to 20 points, and Rishi Sunak is the possibly the last in a run of Conservative Prime Ministers, people might think, particularly in Tamworth, which you did hold up to 2010, maybe you're not on track to win the general election.
Well, first of all, let's see what happens in the results.
Of course.
And let's see what the swings are. But can I let you into a secret?
All right, then.
I've been coming on these types of programmes now for 13 years, doing these by-election nights. That's what you say when you know you're in trouble. That's the line to take, when you know when you're in trouble. And Andrew knows, as well as I do, because I've been in his position, that his colleagues will be not happy in the morning, regardless of whoever narrowly wins or doesn't win, because they'll be looking at the swing and they'll be comparing it to their own seat. He knows that. That's his line to take. That's what his press officers have been telling him. I know it because I've done it as well when we've been having bad results, but that's the reality. Tory MPs are going to be looking at these results and they're going to be really, really nervous, and it's going to cause turmoil on his side in the tea rooms next week.
Andrew?
Maybe the line to take also happens to be true. We are midterm. People are sceptical of politics. They're not sold on Keir Starmer. They want a reason to vote Conservative, and our focus is going to be on delivering the priorities of the British people, delivering the change that is required to take this country forward, whatever the result happens to be this evening. John.
Well, let's talk to Sir John Curtis about the conversation that you two have just been having about the importance of by-elections or not. What do they tell us about the state of the parties? Can they mean that one party or other is on path to victory at a general election possibly coming next year? John?
Well, they can certainly give us an indication, if we compare by-elections with by-elections, as to the relative progress of the opposition and the difficulties of the government. And I think it's already clear from what we're hearing from the counts that Labour have either won or at least come close to these by-elections, that we're going to see a couple of by-elections with very substantial swings from Conservative to Labour. That will indicate, I think, 2 things. One is that the lower swing in Uxbridge will now look rather more like a mirage rather than a pathway to Conservative recovery, and that the result in Selby on the same night may be the better guide as to where we're at. And secondly, it would mean that we would now have 3 by-elections, Selby plus the 2 tonight, in which we've got swings from Conservative to Labour that are towards the top of the top 10. And the last time we were getting swings of this size on a regular basis was the 1992 to 1997 Parliament, which ended in a substantial Conservative defeat. Now, none of this says that the Conservatives are bound to lose, but I think what we probably can conclude at the end of tonight, if what we're hearing from the counts is correct, and that's an important if, is that coupled with the evidence of the opinion polls and the difficulties the Conservatives have had in reducing Labour's leads, there's that at the moment, at least, Labour are on course to win the next election. That, of course, doesn't mean to say they will. There's still 12 months or more to go. But at the moment, at least, it looks like an election for Labour to lose and a very, very difficult situation from which the Conservatives to recover from.
I mean, John, when you look at the by-elections that have happened, and well, let's take the Uxbridge and South Ruislip one, and you've talked about the swings that need to happen for Labour to win. But even if they make a lot of ground, but the Conservatives hold them, psychologically that will be a boost, won't it, for the Conservatives? However sort of bad it looks in terms of movement by Labour, they will still receive a morale boost by holding these seats.
Absolutely. Given how low expectations of the Conservative Party's performance are at the moment, a narrow success for the Conservatives in both of these seats would be taken as a degree of comfort. And of course, the truth is, at the end of the day in politics, although you and I might say, well, let's look at the swing, and John Ashworth might want to say, let's look at the swing, at the end of the day, we all know that the results of these by-elections are going to make much more impact on morale and on the narrative of politics if the Labour Party wins than if they don't. So to that extent, at least, who wins does matter. But, either way, we are now clearly getting seemingly 2 by-elections with very substantial swings, and we're now getting a sequence of by-election swings of the kind that we had in the 92-97 Parliament.
Sir John Curtis, thank you very much. I want to just return to you two particularly, but on the issue of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, because I was sitting here and we were watching the results come in, and it was slightly surprising that the Tories held on to it, and they held on to it largely, as the MP admitted, because of the ultra-low emission zone, because of the issues of air quality, because of the charging. And that miscalculation, as some within your own party judged, lost you that by-election and perhaps influenced the Conservatives and the government to change their approach towards net zero. So, if not watered down, change their approach, because they obviously thought it was a vote winner.
Yeah, and we'll see tonight in these, when we get these results, whether that strategy has worked for them, won't we?
Yeah, I mean, do you think, Andrew, that was what changed the sort of policy of Rishi Sunak to come out and say, we're going to delay, certainly, banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars. We're going to make sure that the war on the motorists, which of course was waged by you, is now going to stop, because we suddenly think that that might be a pathway to victory.
I think the war on the motorists is being waged by Sadiq Khan and other Labour leaders across this country, and it was a misstep by the Labour Party to go ahead, and they have continued to actually press ahead and roll out ULEZ despite opposition to it in Uxbridge and other parts of London and indeed around the rest of the country. But no, the decision that the Prime Minister took on delaying the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, the ban on it until 2035 and the moves on banning new oil and gas boilers to the same date was taken because we need a proportionate and pragmatic response and approach towards net zero. Net zero remains a Conservative Party policy. We're very proud we were the government that brought in the net zero legislation in 2019. We remain committed to it. We've reduced emissions faster than any other G7 nation in the world.
Up until now, but as you know, the Committee on Climate Change says it's stalling.
Fifth largest offshore wind farms in the world producing power off the coast of Great Britain right now. We are going to proceed with this, but we've got to do it in a proportionate, pragmatic way that takes people with us and ensures that people aren't going to be less well off as a result. And that's what the Prime Minister did, and that's why we're moving ahead with those plans.
We'll come back to the issue in just a moment, but I think we can go to Tamworth, not because I think we have a result, but let's catch up and see what Ione Wells can tell us. Do you know, have any idea, Ione, when there might be a result?
Well, certainly the mood in the room is that it could well be much sooner than expected. We weren't expecting a result until about 3:30 or 4 in the morning. Now there's lots of chat that it could be very soon indeed. We've seen the Labour candidate arrive already to big cheers, and she was certainly looking very smiley and positive. But something that may delay things is there is also talk about whether or not a recount may or may not be needed. Now, again, nothing has been confirmed yet, but certainly some of those organising the count here tonight have said that from what they've seen, this is looking very close. If that is the case, there seem to be sort of discussions underway about whether or not a recount would be needed. Obviously, if that does happen, that could well delay any result quite substantially. But certainly the speculation at the moment is that it could come very soon. Now, the fact that it could potentially be very close is in itself, I think, one of the reasons that Labour may be feeling quite positive tonight. We've got to remember that this is a 19,000 majority for the Conservatives at the moment, a huge swing needed for Labour to win in this seat. So if they are sensing that things are very close, I think that may be one of the reasons Labour are feeling pretty confident already.
All right, Ione Wells, there in Tamworth. We'll come back to you if there's any sign of a result or indeed an announcement that they're going to have a recount. Let's find out what is happening in Mid Bedfordshire with Helen Catt. Helen, what about a result there? Anytime soon?
Well, we're still waiting for that. We don't have a time yet. The initial thinking had been that they'd declare around 1:30, 2 a.m. Obviously, we're well past that now. So we are expecting it to be reasonably imminent, but at the moment we don't have any current time frame on it. When it comes, it will be in this hall, actually, that you can see here. That's where the declaration will happen. We started out the night, of course, here with all the party sources suggesting this was going to be extremely close, that it was just too close to call. Over the last few hours, we've seen sources from various parties suggesting that they think Labour are going to take this. In the last few hours, we're also hearing whispers that actually it's possible they might take it by a couple of thousand, 2,000-3,000 votes, those sort of whispers. Now, of course, these are all just the sort of the whispers, the intelligence, the rumours that you get on a by-election night, but that would be a pretty incredible result. What's notable, though, is that the one group of people who are not confirming whether or not they think this is the case is Labour. They are being extremely cautious here. They will concede that they've had a good night, but they are not going as far as saying that they think that they will get over the line here. So we are still, at the moment, waiting for that result to come in.
Helen Catt, thank you very much in Mid Bedfordshire. So it looks as if things are a little bit on hold. In terms of the campaigns, I don't know if you went to Mid Bedfordshire or Tamworth for that matter, John, but what were you hearing from senior Labour figures? Because they've certainly been present, very present, senior figures, no doubt like Jonathan Ashworth, in both those seats.
Yeah, I think that traditionally in one of the seats like this, they know the Lib Dems do quite well. And there was that feeling right at the start of the campaign, should Labour just leave this one to the Lib Dems and concentrate on Tamworth? And the feeling of people around Keir Starmer was, no, we should just go hard for this and let's see in a few weeks' time how are the polls looking. And those first polls that came out did put Labour in either first or second place. It did show that they were on course. They were ahead of the Lib Dems. It's a possibility of an upset. And speaking to some people who've been canvassing there over the last few weeks, they were saying right back at the start of this campaign, Nadine Dorries was coming up a lot on the doorsteps. But as the campaign has dragged on, as we've said several times tonight, it went on for an awful long time. Voters seem to have slightly got over that, and it's been other problems that have been brought into the mix.
I mean, I don't know what other problems they may be. For the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak presumably didn't go to either of these, which isn't unexpected in that sense. Did the Tories spend a lot on these campaigns?
I think there has been a big focus. When you speak to ministers, they've all been on orders to go up, lots of Tory MPs. But I also think, even ahead of the count, speaking to Tory MPs, some are already having a bit of a blame game about their ground game, saying, we're being sent to these seats and then we're being told to leaflet rather than to knock on doors and have conversations. So I think that if it goes the way that, big Labour swings and even that Labour takes both, I think there'll be lots of questions, not just about, general direction as MPs go in electoral calculus and think about what it means for their seat, by-election caveats aside, but also about whether actually the ground game could be improved and whether the Tory party chairman, Greg Hands, is leading it in the correct way.
What do you say to that, Andrew?
I think Greg Hands is an excellent chairman and is leading the Conservative Party's operation on the ground across the country in an excellent manner. We don't have the results tonight, and I think...
No, I mean, but just in terms of campaigning, rather than knocking on doors, leafleting, is that the right strategy?
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of all of the above and more. I mean, in this day and age, it's far more than leafleting and knocking on doors. There's a whole social media campaign that has to be run. There's the postal votes, which are far more prevalent now than they have ever been before. It means there's a lot more telephone canvassing that needs to be done to reach those people who may be voting on different days and from different locations, as would traditionally have been the case. So it's to say that focusing on one and not the other when actually it's a whole widespread campaign that's required these days. I think it's sort of missing the point. I certainly, when I've been out to these constituencies and indeed other ones that I've taken part in for various by-elections, it's been a combination of all of the above that we've been engaging in, and that is as should be the case.
What's worked best for Labour in these seats, do you think, from a campaign? I mean, you're into all of this sort of stuff. You've been doing it for years.
I'm going to say we're definitely keen that Greg Hands stays as Tory party chairman.
He'll be delighted to have your vote of confidence, Jonathan.
Look, we have run a really positive campaign. Just before I came on, I heard Peter Carl talking about the type of campaign they've run there in the mid-bed seats.
Although we did hear from Labour that there were a lot of don't knows, more than perhaps they thought there would be.
Yeah, I mean, look, you always get a significant chunk of don't knows in any election campaign, and it's important that we in the Labour Party are persuading people, we are talking to people directly. But I am struck in these two elections, I spent a lot of time in Tamworth today and over the weekend, the numbers of people who say they are Conservative who are shifting directly to Labour.
They're actually going to vote for Labour, they're not going to stay at home.
Not staying at home, not saying I've had enough, not saying we're going to sit this one out. They have actively shifted their vote from Conservative to Labour. Whether that will be enough for Labour to take these seats, we'll have to wait for these election results. But we were definitely getting that on the ground. And as I say, I come back to this point, I do think a lot of natural Conservatives out there just feel that the Conservative Party have moved away from them and they're looking at a potential Labour government now. as a more natural home for them.
Right, I mean, Sarah, you were saying the same, that lots of people were turning to the Liberal Democrats in Mid Bedfordshire, not Tamworth.
Well, I mean, we were finding much more in this by-election than the other ones that we have fought. People just simply hadn't made up their minds.
Right.
You know, some of our activists were speaking to people this morning, literally on their way to the polling station, not knowing how they were planning to vote. And it was a really significant proportion of voters in this by-election, much, much greater than we've seen in places like Somerton and Tiverton and so on, where we've run big campaigns before. You know, there's absolutely no doubt that people who've always voted Conservative were turning away from the Conservatives in their droves, but where they were planning to vote instead, it was really quite difficult to really work out what people wanted to do instead.
I mean, it's interesting that these by-elections come quite swiftly after the party conferences, particularly after the Labour Party conference. In fact, it feels like an age ago, although it wasn't, of course, when the Conservatives had their conference, which was, how can I put it delicately, with the HS2 decision and issue and announcement sort of hanging over the conference until Rishi Sunak stood up and made his conference speech. A feeling there, particularly, not that these areas of Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire would be directly affected, although Tamworth would be, of course, Tamworth would be affected, that perhaps, again, it underlined that the Conservative Party and the government are just not in touch with ordinary voters.
I don't think that's true at all. I think what we saw as a result of the decision that the Prime Minister made in HS2 is that we were going to be spending millions of pounds actually making the changes that people need in terms
billions,
of local
because
transport.
it was,
billions of pounds.
yeah.
Yes, in terms of improving transport networks around the north of England, around the Midlands and indeed elsewhere.
People might be saying you should be doing that anyway. I mean, the thing is, though, Jonathan Ashworth, there's no commitment from Labour to revive it.
I think the HS2 thing is really, really interesting here, because the reason we have these two by-elections on today, well, yesterday's date, is because the Conservative Party chose those dates, right? Because they were Conservative seats, they moved the writ. That's what it's called. So they chose those dates. So that's the first strategic decision the Tory Party made. That was when they wanted the by-elections. Secondly, they cancelled HS2. Huge bits of the Tamworth constituency have been, as if you like, flattened in preparation for the extension of HS2, which then the Prime Minister then cancelled. So he's chosen a by-election day in a particular constituency, then goes to his conference and makes an announcement which directly angers people in said constituency. That doesn't suggest to me that this is a political operation that knows what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, it must have been pretty difficult to explain on the doorstep in Tamworth that decision and the timing of it.
Look, I know it's very easy to explain that we're going to be investing billions of pounds supporting transport projects across the north of England and across the Midlands, and that's what the Prime Minister announced at Conservative Party conference. And far from actually hanging over a Conservative Party conference, I think the conference was incredibly positive.
Well, you would say that. I can assure you, it was hanging. It was hanging over.
I must correct you, Joe. The Prime Minister did campaign in Tamworth. He went. He
did.
Yes, he did. He went to that constituency.
Oh, I see. Have they just sent you that note?
I just saw a picture of it. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you said. Well, thank you for that correction.
We'll be pointing that out then.
On that,
see the swing.
Yeah. On that note, Andrew Bowie, thank you very much for joining us. Stay in your seat just for a few minutes, because as we've been talking about the party conference, let's just remind you of what the leaders said in their annual speeches, and we'll start with the Liberal Democrats.
The Conservatives botched the deal with Europe. Only we have set out a detailed plan to tear down those trade barriers, fix our broken relationship with Europe, and get a better deal for Britain. As many of you know, my brothers and I lost both our parents to cancer when we were young. There are millions of us whose lives get turned upside down by cancer. As leader of our party, I can at least promise you this. For Liberal Democrat MPs, it will be a top priority. And that's why today I'm announcing our new and ambitious plan to end unacceptable cancer delays and boost survival rates.
I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project. And in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. So I propose that in future, we raise the smoking age by 1 year every year. That means a 14-year-old That means a 14-year-old today will never legally be sold a cigarette, and that they and their generation can grow up smoke-free. We will introduce the new rigorous, knowledge-rich, advanced British standard, which will bring together A-levels and T-levels into a new single qualification for our school leavers.
I know some people don't like the word reform, but I tell you now, there's no other option. We must be the government that finally transforms our NHS. So today we launch a new plan to get Britain building again, a signal of our determination to fight the blockers who hold a veto over British aspiration. No more land bankers sitting comfortably on brownfield sites while rents in their communities rise. No more councils refusing to develop a local plan because they prefer the backdoor deal. If you feel our country needs a party that conserves, that fights for our union, our environment, the rule of law, family life, the careful bond between this generation and the next, then let me tell you, Britain already has one, and you can join it. It's this Labour Party.
Well, happy memories from the recent party conferences. It's a good time to welcome our new guest for the Conservative Party and for the government, Robert Buckland, former Welsh Secretary, former Justice Secretary. Hello to you, and very good of you to come into the studio. What do you remember most from the party conference this year?
Well, like a lot of members of the public, not a lot, frankly. And I think, you know, if we really concentrate on where the public is, you know, the perceptions that form their decisions going out to vote will not be the day-to-day, you know, who's in, who's out, whether Boggins is in or Scroggins is out. It's about what their lives are, what they're facing in their lives and what their perceptions are. And let's face it, it's going to be a difficult night for the government. There's a lot to be done between now and the election, and by-elections are always
haven't got that much time,
an unwelcome kick up the pants for governments, and frankly that's one of their most important functions, and I agree, time is getting short. But let's remember that with both turnout and with the nature of the choice that people have, electing a representative for at best another year, this isn't where the public will be come general election day. And I think that, with that caveat, I think we have to remember to take these results, important though they are, with a very large pinch of salt.
Right, depending on the result, of course. Let's just show you the scene in Tamworth. You can see there they've put up the lectern. Excitement that it's actually appeared, which may mean that we are getting close to a result. It's all being prepared for an announcement for the returning officer, no doubt, to come round and announce the winner in Tamworth. So we might get that result first before Mid Bedfordshire. We had thought it would be the other way round, but we'll leave that there, and if there is any action, we'll return to it directly. Just reflecting on the party conferences and what Robert said. Best forgotten for the Conservatives and the government?
I think the general sense was that Labour was a happier event, but I think you would also expect that when they're about 20 points ahead in the polls. And in a way, I mean, I think it's probably a low bar, but the Tory party conference, as someone covering it, felt, you know, in a better place than it was last year.
Well, that's true, of course.
But I think
that was a low bar.
Yes, but
I think if we're trying
going
to
in the right direction.
I mean, I think the general sense is Labour had a better conference. I think there are some interesting focus groups findings, one by James Johnson, which found that when they were doing focus groups, swing voters 2019, actually quite a lot of positive feedback for Rishi Sunak for having announcements, but at the end of the day, when pressed, these voters still said they'd vote Labour, which I think you can take something either way. And that, to me, I think the general commentariat view was much more was good for Labour and bad for the Tories. And I think such with by-elections and all for conference season, we don't exactly know quite how all the policies the Tories are going to land. You know, we can't look at these by-election results and say, oh, that means they don't like the smoking ban. It's going to take a lot more time, I think, to really know what the effects of some of these things are.
Yeah, would you agree with that? I mean, there hasn't been enough time, has there, for these things to sort of bed down?
No, but I think there is a kind of declining number of opportunities for Rishi Sunak to turn things around. You don't get many opportunities where people pay some vague attention. And you look at the policies that the Tory party did unveil at their conference, I mean, gradually putting up the smoking age maybe in about 10 years' time and mucking around with T levels in maybe 15 years' time so that someone who's 2 or 3 now might have to do slightly different A levels. For people at home who are struggling with the cost of living, who are worrying about the day-to-day and how do they go and get a GP appointment now, I don't think that really answered the problems that the country's facing.
Robert?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister was absolutely right to look to the long term. I think his strength is thinking deeply and seriously about the problems that face our country in the long term. And it's refreshing, in a way, not to have this obsession with the 5-year term. However, we mustn't forget that, of course, the Prime Minister at the beginning of the year set out 5 very clear priorities.
Yes.
Which
and how's he getting on with those?
We are fighting the good fight against inflation. And people said at the beginning of the year it would be a doddle. We all knew it wouldn't be a doddle.
No, but what is it? 6.7% now, and you've got to get it down to about 5%.
Yes.
And we're almost getting close to November.
Which means that it was a serious challenge, and it was something that he could have shied away from and come up with a figure that was much easier.
But Robert,
it's a tough target.
Let's be honest with the public and with the audience. I mean, there isn't anything the government's done particularly to bring down inflation, is it?
Well, look. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of these things relate to international factors as much as national factors. But I do think a government, in terms of its approach to fiscal responsibility and management of the economy, does help to set the tone here. And therefore, the choices that we make in government, perhaps the cheap thrill of perhaps giving a giveaway budget, I'm afraid would stoke the fires of inflation rather than help bring them under control.
So no tax cuts.
Look, I'm not a member of the government, and I'm certainly not the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
No.
But what I would say is that I think that it is responsible in the best traditions of Conservative government of the national interest not to try and hoodwink the public and pretend that somehow you can give with one hand and take away with the other. We won't see that from this Chancellor and Prime Minister, and I think that is very much in the zeitgeist, the spirit of where the British public is at the moment.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of your colleagues, Robert, are going to be very nervous. Whoever wins these, they're going to look at the swings and they're going to be very nervous. And given that we've got the biggest tax burden since the war, given that Rishi Sunak has missed the tax, he's put up tax 25 times, a lot of your backbench colleagues are going to be urging Rishi Sunak to cut tax in this autumn statement, and you're saying, no, don't do that, keep the tax burden where it is at the moment. Is that what you would say to your colleagues?
I am saying no Conservative wants to see the tax burden at this level forever, but we do understand the economic realities and the pressures that are on. And if there is any change to our tax system, then it needs to be streamlined in a way that was unduly complicated by your previous government, and the marginal rates of tax, particularly on younger families.
Well, and the freezing of those tax thresholds.
Well, yeah, but that fiscal drag's another issue. But there are high marginal rates of tax that some taxpayers are facing. That, if we're going to do anything, that's where we place our priority.
Right. I mean, where would your priority be? I mean, you don't want. You say the tax burden's very, very high.
Well, it is under the Conservatives. It's highest since the war, isn't it, under the Conservatives?
But where would you find money?
A lot of that because of Rishi Sunak when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course. And it's also because you've got anemic growth in the economy. If you grow your economy, then you can
we all want to grow the economy. Let's just have a look at what's going on in Tamworth. Let's have a listen in because it looks like it looks like the returning officer is about to make an announcement.
Better growth under Labour, Robert.
Thank you very much.
A little high couple. Yes. Now that looks like the Labour candidate there being talked to by the returning officer. So everybody is filing in. There clearly is going to be the result very shortly. We can see the Liberal Democrat candidate there too. We're just waiting for Andrew Cooper, whom I can't see just as yet, who's the Conservative candidate there in Tamworth. But clearly they are getting prepared for the result in the Tamworth by-election. It'll be quite something if Labour actually takes this from the Conservatives, because it will have meant a massive swing away from the Tories, who have held this since 2010 with a very significant majority. Let's have a listen.
Yeah, show your pretty eyes.
Are there any other candidates going to join us on the stage? Okay, okay.
Well, I think the returning officer is waiting to see if any of the other candidates that have taken part from any other parties in this Tamworth by-election are going to appear, but it looks as if they're all gathered now. Well, not the Conservative candidate, but let's see. Maybe that is why there is the slight pause from the returning officer waiting for the Conservative candidate, whom you would expect to be on the stage, Andrew Cooper, because he might have won. You never know. Ah.
Sorry for the short intermission.
Well, it looks like there is going to be a little bit of a wait while they find Andrew Cooper. Everybody's looking round to see where is the Conservative candidate, because the other parties, or certainly the main parties, are waiting. You can see there for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, certainly, hoping to hear the result. But it's interesting to know whether Andrew Cooper's not there because he's lost, or they think it's so close that, of course, they might be wanting to have a recount. But these are all the sort of realms of speculation that I am entering into while we wait. All a bit difficult for the candidate standing there, watching and waiting with the returning officer to find out what's happening. Katie, what do you make of it without the Conservative candidate there?
Raises quite a few questions.
It does. Without giving us
I mean,
any...
if it is the case that Labour wins, and we're about to find out, I mean, it's clearly a result that's going to be very disappointing for that Conservative candidate, and means, because of what's happening, we think, with Eddie Hughes, the Tory MP, if this Tory candidate does not get the seat, they are unlikely to be the candidate picked at the general election. It will then go to Eddie Hughes, the current Tory MP, who's planning to switch seats. So it's really their only chance to go for Tamworth.
Right. Well, we're being told, I understand, that the Conservative candidate isn't even in the hall. Now, I would be the last person to criticise a returning officer, there for the grace of God go I, but one might have thought we'd have found out if all the main candidates standing in this by-election were actually in the building before gathering everybody up on the stage. So there's obviously a search going on for Andrew Cooper.
Well, I mean, having been in many elections,
yes.
There's been a huddle.
Yes, exactly.
To tell them the result before.
Yeah.
Let's let the public in on the secret. The candidates don't come on the platform
without knowing
the result. We know the result. Sorry about it.
You know, you are. You pulled the curtain back on the by-election. What are we going to do on the next one?
I've even been a by-election candidate. I know.
Oh, there he is. There he is. He's appeared. He's appeared.
Very good.
Right.
The election of a Member of Parliament for Tamworth on Friday, the 20th of October. I, Andrew Barrett, being the acting returning officer at this election, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at said election is as follows. Bill Cliff Robert, UK Independence Party, 436 votes. Cooper, Andrew, commonly known as Andy Cooper, the Conservative Party candidate, 10,403 votes. Cooper, Ian Stewart, Reform UK, 1,373 votes. Edwards, Sarah Sienna, Labour Party, 11,719 votes. Hope, Alan, commonly known as Howling Lord Hope, the official Monster Raving Loony Party, 155. Howarth, Susan Gale, commonly known as Sue Howarth, Green Party, 417. Longman, Peter George, 86. Simon Ashley, Britain First, Stop the Boats, 580. Virk, Sundeep Singh, commonly known as Sunny Virk, Liberal Democrats, 417. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. For want of an official mark, 0. Voting for more candidates than the voter was entitled to, 9. Writing or mark by which voter could be identified, 1. Being unmarked or wholly void for uncertainty, 34, which gives a total of 44. Vacant seats is 1. The electorate is 71,302. Ballot paper issued, 25,630, which gives a turnout of 35.95%. And I do hereby declare that Sarah Sienna Edwards is duly elected.
So, Labour have won Tamworth, and that is something of a historic moment for them, even in by-election terms. She obviously looks delighted. We'll wait to see if she's going to say a few words at the lectern.
Tonight, the people of Tamworth have voted for Labour's positive vision and a fresh start. They've sent a clear message to Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives that they have had enough of this failed government which has crashed the economy and destroyed our public services. The people of Tamworth have made it clear. It's time for change. I want to thank the returning officer, my election agent, Charlotte Walker, election staff and police for the smooth running of this election and count. I know it's a lot of work that goes unmentioned, so thank you for your professionalism and commitment to the democratic process. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank my campaign team and the wider Labour movement. I cannot express in words just how much I appreciate the sacrifices that you have all made to ensure that we turn Tamworth Labour. Tonight, we have turned a page on Tory neglect and delivered a fresh start for Tamworth and our villages. And thank you to my wonderful family and my mother who have given me endless support over the years. Above all, I would like to thank the people of Tamworth and the villages who have put their trust in me to be their Member of Parliament. I have made promises to you that I intend to keep. I will be your voice in Westminster and challenge this government to get a better deal for Tamworth. You have my solemn promise. I know a lot of you have voted Labour for the first time, and I will not let you down. I've spoken to many people in this campaign, and the same conversation has been repeated. People feel worse off after 13 years of the Conservatives and don't feel like the government have a plan to address the big issues that face our country. And it's not acceptable that our town centre has been allowed to lose shop after shop with no plan to rejuvenate it. It is not acceptable that thousands of people cannot see a GP within 2 weeks, and more than 110,000 people are currently waiting across Staffordshire for an operation. It is not acceptable that our town no longer has a public-facing police station and many crimes go unsolved. And it is not acceptable that a third of our children live in poverty in Tamworth because of the decisions of this government. People in Tamworth and across the country are sick of the government's failure to tackle the big issues facing our country. People are being hit by a cost of living crisis, which has seen energy bills soar, petrol and food prices rocket, and the weekly budget stretched. And the government have failed to help working people. In this election, we offered a plan for Tamworth that was positive, full of ideas and hope. a hope that politics should be about creating a better country for us all. Only Keir Starmer's Labour Party has the vision and the ideas to make life better for everybody in our country. Change is the question at the next election, and the answer is Labour. Keir Starmer and Labour offer a decade of national renewal to replace 13 years of national decline. My message to the residents of Tamworth is this: I will be a visible and approachable Member of Parliament who delivers on our town's priorities and gives Tamworth its future back. My message to the Prime Minister is get in your government car, drive to Buckingham Palace, do the decent thing and call a general election. Thank you.
Well, that's Sarah Edwards, who is the new MP, the Labour MP for Tamworth. It's a pretty stunning victory for the Labour Party after all the talk that we have had. 11,719 votes cast to her, but that gives Labour a 23.9% swing. Keir Starmer has been very quick off the mark in terms of responding and saying this is a phenomenal result that shows Labour is back in the service of working people and redrawing the political map. To those who have given us their trust and those considering doing so, Labour will spend every day acting in your interests and focused on your priorities. Labour will give Britain its future back. Congratulations, Jonathan Ashworth. What did you make of what she said? Quite a confident speaker there and quite a confident speech, talking about hope.
Yeah, I mean, a stunning victory, I think this is the biggest swing, Conservative to Labour swing, or second biggest since the war. I'm absolutely delighted for Sarah and her brilliant Labour team on the ground there. And it's clear a lot of people have put their trust in us. A lot of people who voted Conservative last time have switched to Labour in this election, and we welcome them. And we're going to work really hard to repay that trust. But we also know we've got to work really hard across the rest of the country now to take our message out, to earn people's trust over what we hope is a general election sooner rather than later, but certainly within the next 12 months. So there's still a lot to do, but that is a stunning victory. And I think you can see from that result that people who voted Conservative last time feel that the Conservative government have moved away from them, and they're looking at Labour afresh, and they like what Keir Starmer is saying.
All right, let's just have a look at those results. You can see them there. Sarah Edwards, as I say, with 11,700 or so votes. Andrew Cooper, 10,403. He was the Conservative candidate who took forever to get onto the stage, but eventually made it, and perhaps that was the reason why. You can see the Liberal Democrat, Sunny Verk, there with only 400 or so seats. We'll talk to Sarah Olney in just a moment, but the majority for Sarah Edwards is 1,316 on a low turnout, on 36%. But still, this is a pretty seismic victory for the Labour Party in Tamworth, a seat they haven't held since 2010. It's been solidly Conservative. Let's have a look at the share. 46% there for Labour. Yes, we were talking about what the figures might be. 41% for Conservative. Let's have a look at the change, which is always interesting. You can see there the big drop in the Conservative vote, down at 26%, Labour's up 22%. And the all-important swing, the amount that has gone from the Conservatives to Labour, and you can see it there, 23.9%, nearly 24% swing. And we will talk about what that would mean, and we have lots of caveats around this, but what that would mean if that was replicated in any way across the country. But hugely disappointing for you, Robert, isn't it?
Well, of course it is. I mean, Tamworth is a seat that has progressively moved away from Labour since the Tories won it in 2010 with a majority of votes 6,000. It's it's part of that Midland sort of move away from Labour. Look, this is a very good result, and congratulations to the Labour candidate. I'm more than happy to say that, of course. I think, though, it's interesting, isn't it? It's still very much a two-horse race in Tamworth. You've got both the parties in the 40s, which there is some kind of comfort, I think, for Conservatives that the base really didn't totally desert the party.
Well, it was a
however, I said the
low turnout possibly means that many Conservatives.
Whilst I'm not going to disagree with John that there will be switches, of course there will be, that the Labour vote will have been motivated to come up because because they thought for the first time in many years they could win the seat, and a lot of Tories would be staying at home. So we can't discount that differential turnout.
Do you accept that this was an area in a part of the country, in the West Midlands, where the Conservatives had done well, particularly a strong vote leave area?
Yes.
Voting leave in that EU referendum, moving right away from Labour. Does this show, if you are a Conservative and you've got a seat in towns in the West Midlands, you'll be worried about that, won't you?
I think, you know, Labour have worked to decontaminate their brand. There's no doubt that the brand
You think it's
in
just
the Midlands...
decontamination, not love for?
Well, that's what I think. That's what I think. Right. And I think, you know, of course, you know, it's progress for Labour. We're not going to deny that at all. But I don't think any of us here in the studio should be sitting here thinking, well, that's job done, the election's decided. This is a decision made in a difficult backdrop for the Conservatives. It's a decision to have a representative for another 12 months. It isn't the sort of general election calculation that the voters are going to be making in greater numbers in that seat and other seats in the West Midlands in the next 12 months.
Right. I mean, Jonathan Ashworth, it's difficult, of course, sitting here now with that great result for the Labour Party to read more into what might happen at a general election. But what will you take away from this in terms of a strategy in the West Midlands, in a part of the country that Labour has struggled in and needs to win back if you were going to be on that path to victory in a general election?
Well, nobody in the Labour Party is going to take this result as proof that the Labour Party is on course for some great general election victory. No. We know we have to work really, really hard to earn the trust of the British people across the country because we had a terrible result in 2019. However, this result, on the back of the Selby result before the summer, does show that the changed Labour Party, the way Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party, the message that he is putting out there, the message of hope that he's putting out there, is resonating with people, and Conservatives are moving to Labour because they feel the Conservative government have moved away from them. Still a lot of work to do for us. We know we've got a long way to go, but this is a significant result tonight.
Right. I mean, yours were 417 votes, I think, for the Liberal Democrat candidate, the same as the Greens. Actually, is that disappointing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what Robert was saying there was this is a really competitive election, and I don't think, you know, Tamworth has seen a competitive election for quite some time. And I think if you're in that position, and actually your natural instinct is you want to vote for the Liberal Democrats, but you're hearing that it's going to be very close, you know, you'll be quite motivated to, you know, maybe lend your vote to Labour, because I think a lot of Liberal Democrat voters right now are really quite committed to wanting to see Tory MPs defeated. And, you know, we're not competitive in every seat. So in those seats where we're not competitive, I think Liberal Democrats are, you know, happy to switch.
How significant is this victory?
Well, I think we've almost got used to these big sort of swings in by-elections just because of the last couple of months. But you look at the swing there, what was it, 23.9%. That's the second biggest ever swing from the Tories to Labour in a by-election. The biggest was Dudley West in 1994. And then the third one was Selby and Hasty
in July,
just a few weeks ago. You look at those big swings, it does look like Labour is making progress, and you compare that to a couple of years ago when we had by-elections like Hartlepool, where the Tories managed to cling on there, and people were saying there, well, Keir Starmer hasn't sealed the deal. It is now starting to look like in these seats where there was a lot of Brexit voters that have voted Tory ever since the Tories been in power in 2010, are now starting to turn to the Labour Party.
Right. I mean, in terms of the Conservatives, there will be MPs worried now, won't there, by this result and thinking, ooh, it's not looking very good ahead of a general election for me.
Yes, I mean, I think there are MPs already worried about the general election, and just because it does fit into a pattern. But it just does further do that. I mean, I think if you look at Tamworth as a seat, clearly I think Labour will look at the heavy Leave vote and find this really encouraging. Of course, it is the case that when Labour has been in power, that seat has been Labour. When the Tories have, it has been Tory. So it can be talked as a bellwether seat. All these things are a bit more complicated. But therefore, I think it's just adding to that sense that Keir Starmer looks on course to win the next election and probably have a majority government. It's just that there is still some time to go. But it's just confirming, as the by-election the polls do, that the polls seem to be correct.
Well, Sarah Edwards is now the new MP in Tamworth, the new Labour MP in Tamworth, and we can speak to her. There she is. Hello to you, Sarah. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you very much. Hello.
It's a historic win. The Conservatives last won this seat with almost 20,000 votes in 2019. What do you think it says about the mood of the country?
I think it demonstrates, what we've been hearing here on the doors, which is that people are really fed up, very frustrated, and they're not seeing the Conservatives give them a positive, vision for the country. What we have been doing is offering that, from the Labour Party, being very clear that there is change, there is a fresh start, there is an opportunity, that they do not have to continue in this vein. And I think that they have voted that way very, very clearly and sent a strong message.
I don't want to dampen your victory in any way, but the turnout was low, even by by-election standards, 36%, just under. And we've been talking here in the studio that could possibly be down to many disaffected Tories staying at home. So you won by default, almost, because of a low turnout and because the Tories didn't come out on polling day.
Well, I think actually it's the opposite. We've had a historic victory here. The largest victory in a very long time. So I think what that actually demonstrates is that Conservative voters have voted Labour. I have spoken to many of them who have said they're not going to vote Conservative, that they are going to vote for Labour, that they want to give that a fresh start a try, that they want to hear that positive vision, and that they have not seen that. They've not had an MP for the best part of a year and a half. So I would say that, in fact, they have come to us and they're seeing that as an option again.
I mean, this is an area that voted heavily for Brexit. Is that an issue that has gone away as far as you're concerned on the doorstep? Was it talked about?
It's come up, that is, of course, many things have come up on the doorstep. But I think we've been very clear, from a Labour perspective, that, we are going to continue as we are. We're not going to be going back into the customs union. We're going to make Brexit work, and we've been clear about that on the doors. But what people have been really focused on is these issues around the cost of living crisis, the fact that they cannot afford to pay their bills, that their mortgages have gone through the roof, that rent is incredibly challenging, that fuel and food and all of these issues are compounding their living experience, and they're not seeing any solutions from the Conservative government. They're not seeing a future that is positive, and we've offered them that change and that chance for a fresh start here in Tamworth.
Would you like to see significant amounts of money go into public services if Labour wins next year? Is that what people would like to see from a Labour government?
What they want to see from a Labour government is that NHS services are funded appropriately and properly.
And what does that mean?
Everything that Labour has set out in its plan to make sure that the NHS is funded, is fully costed. So it means that, we're going to have 10,000 more nurses. It means that we're going to have 7,500 more doctors, and they're going to come through training. It means that we're going to use technology as a means to, reform the way that the health service works. But, this is after 13 years of Tory neglect. This is a problem that people know is going to take time and is going to be a great challenge. But the Labour Party is up for that challenge, because having established the NHS, we're very confident that not only are we going to defend it, but we're going to make sure that it's there for the future. And that is what people in Tamworth here have voted very clearly for.
And they'll want to see the end of the strikes, the end of the junior doctors and consultant strikes. Do you think Labour should be offering more if they become the ones who negotiate those pay deals in the end? Should they offer more in order to end the strikes? Otherwise, they'll continue under a Labour government.
I think the main thing here is that the Conservative government has not come to the table in over, 6 months now, 180 days plus and counting. This is about industrial relations. It's about making sure that the workforce is valued and listening to them, and that's incredibly important. That has not been happening. We went through a pandemic where our NHS staff worked incredibly hard to make sure that we were safe. And instead of talking to them, instead of valuing them, they have refused to speak to them. So Labour, of course, would get round the table and make sure that we solve this issue. And that's by dialogue, and that is through making sure that we have positive industrial relations. There were no strikes under the Labour government, before. So I think that sets a very clear tone that we know how it is that we're going to take this forwards.
Sarah, what was the one issue? What was the one issue that came up on the doorstep more than any other?
I mean, it's very difficult. All of the things that I was campaigning on came up a lot, but I would probably have to say it was both the NHS, this issue around its funding, as we've just spoken about, but also the police station and crime and antisocial behaviour. The fact that Tamworth does not have a public-facing police desk at the moment. The nearest police station is 20 miles away, and people are highly concerned that the police force has been cut drastically under the Conservative government. So this came up time and time again, that people didn't feel as safe in their communities, that they wanted to know that community policing was on the agenda, and Labour have committed to 13,000 police officers if elected, and a real focus on community policing so that we know who it is in the community to go to, and that there's a proper link established, because that has dissipated under the Conservatives, who have made extreme cuts and have left people feeling vulnerable.
Sarah Edwards, now the new MP, the new Labour MP in Tamworth. Congratulations to you. We'll let you go, but we'll have a look here for our guests and our viewers at the figures and what actually happened in Tamworth. Interestingly, you can see there, Sarah, we've just spoken to her. She topped the poll there, 11,719, with a majority, I mean, not a huge majority, but a majority of 1,316 over the Conservative candidate, Andrew Cooper. It was a low turnout of 36%. But the most interesting figures, of course, are what the changes are. 46%, though, in terms of the share of the vote for Labour, and 41% for the Conservatives. And we can see the change in support there. That's the important figure. The Conservatives losing 26% and Labour gaining 22% to give them that victory in Tamworth, and a swing of 23.9%. And that is a pretty historic swing. In fact, we'll put it into context with Sir John Curtis, who can tell us your reaction, John.
Well, this is undoubtedly an extremely good result for the Labour Party. As John Ashworth has already said, it's just the second highest swing ever from Conservative to Labour. It's just very slightly higher than the swing in Selby. But let me add three other observations to what has been said so far. The first is that no government has hitherto lost to the principal opposition party in a by-election a seat as safe as Tamworth. The previous record was in Ashfield in 1977, which the Labour government then lost. Then it was defending a 41% majority. Now a 42% majority has been lost. Secondly, I think this result also shows a potential risk to the Conservatives of how they're going to may get caught in a pincer movement between some of their former Leave voters wandering off to Labour, but others going off to Reform UK. Notice that Reform UK saved their deposit with 5% of the vote, and that also actually their share of the vote is slightly bigger than Labour's majority. And I'm not saying that everybody who voted Reform UK would otherwise have voted Conservative, but almost undoubtedly that is part of the story. Third observation, very strict historical parallel. This constituency, in its virtually identical geography, but in the previous name of South East Staffordshire, had a by-election in 1996.
Yes.
There was a 22% swing from Conservative to Labour, and 12 months later, Labour won the general election very clearly. So we have now seen a by-election in exactly the same place with virtually exactly the same swing, just 12 months before what previously, at least, was a Labour victory.
Sir John Curtis, thank you very much. I mean, what do you make of those observations? I mean, they're all extremely interesting in terms of historical context, and it does look as if the advantages definitely are all going Labour's way. If you take 96 before the landslide in 97, I'm not saying that this would be a landslide, but the indicators are there.
Well, yeah, let me add just two other sort of observations, is that I think this is now the third by-election gain that we've had with a 20% plus swing, because we had Selby
and Ainsty
and Rutherglen. And we're forgetting, I mean, the Scottish result, Rutherglen as well. That was a 20% swing, which is very significant also for the Labour Party. This seat was something like the 57th safest Tory seat.
Yes.
So it is a quite stunning result. But look, you know, Labour is not taking anything for granted. We know we've got to work really, really hard across the rest of the country to continue to persuade people to switch to us. But what I do want to say, I thought Sarah in that interview just, I think, shows that Tamworth is going to be really safe in her hands. She's going to be a real fighter.
Because she hasn't got long, has she, really, before the general election when it comes.
You quite rightly, by the way, you know, asked her tough questions, quite rightly. But I think she was more than capable of dealing with your tough questions. And that just shows you what a good MP she's going to be And that shows you again why so many Conservatives have put their trust in her today or tonight.
What do you make of what you heard from Sir John Curtis? If you look at history in terms of the by-election as in South East Staffordshire in 1996 and in terms of governing parties losing by-elections by this amount in terms of a swing, it doesn't bode well. Should Rishi Sunak change tack in any way? Is there going to be pressure on him to do something different in response? There'll have to be a response to this, won't there?
This has been an extraordinary parliament, hasn't it? I mean, we have seen by-election results that have swung
And Prime
wildly.
Ministers.
I mean, yeah.
Come and go.
And, you know, Hartlepool was only 2.5 years ago, which was an incredible win for the Tories.
Yeah.
This has been an incredible seesaw of a parliament, and I think it would be a foolish person to try and sort of extrapolate from what happened 25, 26 years ago and say, slam dunk, you know, like next year, nothing's going to move, pendulum's not.
But are you feeling less than confident?
Look, I've been around this particular politics for a long time. This will be the third sort of iteration, really, of potential electoral movement that I've experienced either as a candidate or as a member of Parliament. And the truth is that no election is actually like its predecessor. And John would agree with me on this. You know, Labour are coming from a very low base, the lowest base since 1935.
Yeah, but you were coming from such a high bar, if you think of the majority in 2019, and it seems to just be going the other way. But
Well, yes, but, you know, I think the biggest comparison we can make is actually between this scenario in 2010, where, you know, an incumbent government lost office, but not with a majority for the opposition party. And I still think that the most likely scenario at the moment...
Really? You think it would be the largest party?
I think that the idea that, you know, Labour are going to have these sort of swings at a general election, I think, is for the birds. I think that it's going to be far closer.
But Scotland might be different this time.
And I'm sorry to do this to you. I'm sorry to do this to you.
John, what's your question?
To lose your seat is something like Labour needs something like a 6% swing, right? Come on, looking at that, do you think you're going to hold your seat?
Look,
honestly, what's your take?
In politics a long, long time, John, and I am not saying here that Tories should give up, pack up, and go home. I do not think that
Rishi
extrapolating a 35%...
Because he went to Tamworth. We heard that earlier from the previous Conservative.
This is a 35% turnout. With respect to everybody involved, this does not tell us what is going to happen at general election.
No.
And,
there are going to be jitters. There are going to be jitters, aren't there?
There are going to be jitters. Of course there are. Like there were jitters in the Labour Party with those results earlier in the Parliament. So, look, the pendulum is swinging towards Labour at the moment, but we still have a year to go.
But should anything change in order to stop that happening?
I think it would be a foolish Prime Minister who chops and changes things on the basis of one or two by-election results. And I don't think Rishi Sunak is that. No, we didn't. I mean, come on. You know, analyse what happened with regard to that announcement. None of the manufacturing targets on electric vehicles were changed. He quite rightly wanted to take the burden off those least able to pay, which is what ULEZ is all about.
But what about...
Shame the meat tax didn't win it for him there, though, is it?
Look, again, you know, do you think that sort of thing has any cut through? No, I don't. I think, you know, the public choose the issues, John. You and I know that. We don't choose the issues, and we know what the issues are going to be. They're going to be about the economy at the election. Well, the Prime Minister knows that absolutely.
Rishi Sunak's position will be secure because the Conservatives couldn't go through another leadership contest at this time, whatever happens. And we will be going to Mid Bedfordshire fairly soon because I think we're going to get the result there shortly. But in terms of any changes here to calm nerves in the parliamentary party, and also, interestingly, Sir John Curtis mentioning Reform UK, that actually people who are perhaps fed up in areas where they did vote quite strongly to leave the European Union, perhaps don't think Brexit has been realised in the way they'd like to. They've gone to Labour or Reform UK. I think we can see the returning officer, let's have a look, actually getting ready in Mid Bedfordshire. So we'll keep an eye on that. But Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to get is a battle of ideas once again in the Tory party about what exactly Rishi Sunak should be doing. And I think the suggestions will be from the people we'd expect, saying you should cut tax. And then I think you'll have other figures talking about a move to the right in other ways, you know, Danny Kruger and others who've been calling for, you know, we look at the New Conservative group and some of their ideas on immigration. And I think when you tend to have these, you know, results like that, which do create jitters, it tends to be more, everyone has their own answer for what they think the problem is, which tends to be the cause they've been championing for the past, you know, XX years of their career. Rishi Sunak's instincts will not be to, bow to that. I think in number 10, they think almost if you look like you're changing path, you're conceding defeat, people try and push you further.
Right.
But I think it will be clearly, a tough few weeks for him.
Well, let's have a look here. All the candidates, and hopefully there hasn't been one left behind in Mid Bedfordshire, or the Conservatives certainly. They're all gathering there. The returning officers there. Let's just listen in case they're about to announce the result there in Mid Bedfordshire. Again, all those huddles that Robert Buckland was talking about will have happened. So the candidates know who's won. So we're just waiting. But again, I can't see the Conservative candidate. Is this a pattern going on behind...
OK, good morning, everybody.
Here we go.
I, Russell Beard, being the returning officer at the election of a Member of Parliament for the Mid Bedfordshire parliamentary constituency held on Thursday the 19th of October 2023, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the election is as follows. Akinbozoe Festus, the Conservative Party candidate, 12,680. Caudle Sid, actually known as Caudle Sidney Clifford, Christian People's Alliance, 101. Emperor of India, Prince Ankit Love, 27. Holland Dave, actually known as Holland David Arthur, Reform UK, 1,487. Holland Lindsay, Emma Louise, Liberal Democrats, 9,420. Kelly Anne, actually known as Kelly Anne Maria, the official monster raving loony party, 249. Mackie Gareth, Independent, 1,865. Rooney Chris, actually known as Rooney James Christopher, Mainstream, 24. Sibley Cade, actually known as Sibley Cade Lee, Green Party, 732. Strathern Alistair Luke, Labour Party, 13,872. Thomas Alberto George, Heritage Party, 63. Victor Allen, True and Fair Party, 93. Vitiello Antonio Daniel, English Democrats, Putting England First, 107. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. Want of official mark, 0. Voting for more candidates than the voter was entitled to, 23. Writing or mark by which voter could be identified, 2. Being unmarked or void for uncertainty, 77. Rejected in part, 0. Total, 102. Vacant seats, 1. Electorate, 92,578. Ballot papers issued, 40,822. Turnout, 44%. I therefore duly declare Alistair Luke Strathern elected as Member of Parliament for the Mid Bedfordshire parliamentary constituency.
Well, it's Labour's night. They've won the second by-election. You can see there their new Labour MP, Alistair Strathern, winning with 13,872 votes ahead of his Tory rival on 12,680. The Liberal Democrat had a good showing too on nearly 9,500 votes. We're waiting to see if Alistair Strathern will come to the lectern and give a victory speech. Like his other MP now in Tamworth, Sarah Edwards. He's waiting there, obviously delighted. So Peter Kyle, who ran the campaign, I think there is something of a disturbance going on. Somebody obviously wanting to say something. I don't know if it was one of the candidates or not, or one of their party.
I have to say I'm going to struggle to top that.
Oh.
But I do want to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone involved in the count tonight. This election hasn't always felt the quickest by-election, as I'm sure the candidates behind me can pay testament to, but I am deeply grateful for your work in promoting the election, supporting the election, and in conducting such a thorough and efficient count tonight. Because tonight, residents across Mid Bedfordshire made history. After decades of being taken for granted, being left behind, being underrepresented, they made the decision it was time for a change. It was time to deserve better. It was time to get better politics, higher standards, and it was time for Labour. But this victory is only possible because the Labour Party has changed. Under new leadership, we've moved to where the country is and to where Mid Bedfordshire is. We're a party that's fit for sound economic policy, a party that's going to deliver safer streets and get our NHS back on its feet again. We love our country and its traditions, a country where playing by the rules matters, where ambition and hard work are rewarded, and where everyone has a chance to succeed in life. That's the Bedfordshire I grew up in, and that's the Bedfordshire that's delivered a resounding message tonight. And that is why people are turning to Labour. Our values as a party are shared by people across our county, towns, cities, and yes, even rural villages and farming communities like those right across Bedfordshire. Nowhere is off limits for this Labour Party, and tonight's result proves it. I set about trying to send a message here. We knew that we had a chance, but we knew we were going to have to work hard. People here have been given good reason to doubt politics, to be sceptical that it could be there for them and there for their values. And I'm so, so proud of everyone involved in this campaign for showing them that they can have better, that politics can speak up for the towns and villages across Mid Bedfordshire. It can speak up for our values, and those values have a home here in the Labour Party. To those who put your trust in me, particularly those of you who voted Labour for the first time, I won't let you down. From tomorrow until the day of the general election, I will be working hard to show you you made the right choice in me and you made the right choice in Labour to speak for your values and to champion them locally and in Parliament. I'll work day and night to repay you, to show your trust is in the right place, to show you that decency can have a place in our politics again. As your MP, I'll be a man of my word. Me and Megan will be living here by your side, will be accessible to you, and find a voice for you when you need it most. A real pleasure for me throughout this campaign has been the thousands and thousands of conversations I've got to have with so many of you. And to all of you who took the time to speak to me, to give me a hearing, whether you supported me or not, thank you. Your conversations, your engagement, your support has been such a powerful motivator to a campaign that went on several days, several months, several wet days, several sunny days, but got us to where we are today. A historic message and a historic moment. But throughout all of that, one conversation really sticks with me. I recently, over the last month, had the pleasure of meeting a man called Neville. In his 90s, he'd been voting Labour his entire life, first under Clement Attlee. He'd lived in Bedfordshire his entire life. Every time he showed up at the general election to cast his vote for Labour, to not see a Labour MP returned. Well, today, Neville, I have to say, I hope the wait was worth it. Thank you for your patience, thank you for your support with Bedfordshire, and thank you for supporting me to give us a much stronger voice in Parliament. Thank you.
Alistair Strathern there giving his victory speech, and well deserved to give a victory speech because it's the first Labour MP for Mid Bedfordshire in almost 100 years. As he said, nowhere is off limits, it seems, for the transformed Labour Party under new leadership, because Mid Bedfordshire is made up of many rural parts, villages, not necessarily traditional territory for the Labour Party. But Jonathan Ashworth, it really is Labour's night.
Another phenomenal result, and I think that surely must be a 20% swing.
Well, we're waiting for the figures, but it must be close to that, I would think. So yes, it's right up there with Selby and Ainsty and with Tamworth
and Rutherglen
And
I think that just shows you right across the country, from Scotland to the Midlands to Bedfordshire, people are turning to Labour. They are switching to Labour. A lot of Conservatives across England and Wales are switching to Labour. We've obviously picking up votes from Conservatives and SNP in Scotland. there's a long way to go, possibly up 12 months, possibly slightly more than 12 months. We'd hope not, but possibly 12 months. And I think it's pretty clear that there is a yearning for change. People have had enough of the Conservatives. They've had enough of Rishi Sunak. They don't believe what he says anymore. They know after 13 years that nothing works in the country. We've had 13 years of failure. It is time for a change.
You're going to inherit all that, of course.
Yeah, we're going to inherit.
Yeah.
We're going to
And
inherit.
you've got no money to do anything with it.
Public services on its knees, the NHS on its knees. We're going to inherit the economy.
Will anyone notice the difference if you win next year?
Pretty terrible state. Well, yeah, because we put forward really practical policies which we think can deliver more appointments in the NHS, can improve our schools, can get more police on the streets. So, yeah, so people will notice a difference. There are big differences between the parties. There are still issues worth fighting for. But the country wants change. I think that's the message that we're getting loud and clear tonight.
I mean, this is a completely different constituency to Tamworth, Mid Bedfordshire, not just geographically, but in terms of the type of constituency it is, and yet it's gone. I mean, it's been Conservative for nearly 100 years. I mean, it is quite something that in commuter belt, which arguably, of course, when Tony Blair won that landslide in 1997, he didn't take that area, but close by in Hertfordshire and areas in Northamptonshire and now Mid Bedfordshire.
And you can see the size of the constituency, 92,000 voters. I mean, that's going to be broken up by the Boundary Commission very shortly. But it is interesting, isn't it, to note that at the end of it all, in a long campaign, 4 months, I mean, I don't think we've ever seen a by-election
everyone looks exhausted.
Like that. In the end, the electorate decided that they wanted to punish the Conservatives and they swung behind the Labour candidate, to whom I give warm congratulations, of course. The Liberal vote, I'm sure Sarah will speak about this, was strong.
Yes.
And in the end, there was a decision to coalesce around one person to punish the Conservatives after a very inauspicious backdrop to the campaign. An MP who had delayed her, announced her
Nadine
resignation and had delayed her announcement. That really hampered our excellent Conservative candidate, who I thought in his gesture of goodwill to the elected Labour MP, I thought showed his quality, and I very much hope that Festus will reappear, because I think he's an outstanding public servant, and I hope that he gets a chance to serve the part of the seat that perhaps he might be selected for.
Well, let's have a look at the figures, because we want to know what the all-important swing is. So if we show the figures for the candidates, and the winning one in this case, Labour's Alistair Strathern, Mid Bedfordshire. Nearly 14,000, majority of just over 1,100 over Festus Akinbosoye, who had 12,680, Police and Crime Commissioner, the Conservative candidate. But as we've been saying, the Liberal Democrat, Emma Holland-Lindsay, very strong showing there on nearly 9,500, and it was a higher turnout than Tamworth, of 44%. If we see here the share, 34% for Labour, 31% for the Conservatives, 23% for the Liberal Democrats. I mean, it was competitive in that sense for the three parties. The drop there of 29% from the Conservatives, giving Labour a 12% increase, and the Liberal Democrats 11% in the seat that Labour have just gained, and the swing. Let's have a look. So, Conservatives to Labour, it's over 20%. So, Jonathan Ashworth, right, it's right up there with the other.
That's the fourth seat now with a 20%.
Well, John Curtis, again, it really is Labour's night, with a pretty impressive swing there from the Conservatives to them.
Yes, but there is a contrast between this result and the result in Tamworth. This is much more a result about a collapse in the Conservative vote, a collapse that in the end was pretty much evenly shared between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. In fact, it is the second biggest drop in Conservative support in any by-election where the principal contestant for the seat was the Labour Party. So the truth is, two by-election results, both of them extremely bad news for the Conservatives. They're, in whatever criteria you use, they're up there in very clearly in the top 10 of worst Conservative performances against the Labour Party. And we've now had three by-elections with swings at 20% or more. To the Labour Party, the last time we had that was, again will repeat, was the 1992 to 97 Parliament. And I think, Robert Buckland's quite right. It is 12 months to go. This isn't destiny, but it is a pointer. And it is a pointer that unless the Conservatives can fairly dramatically and fairly radically turn things around, then they are in truth staring defeat in the face in 12 months' time.
Right. So, John Curtis, thank you very much. Let me just get, first of all, we'll pick up on those points, but from you, Sarah Olney, it was evenly split, the collapse in the Tory vote. Fairly evenly split, obviously, not completely. It did hold up well, the Liberal Democrat vote.
Well, it more than held up, actually. We're the only party of the top three parties to actually increase the number of votes we got compared to 2019. You actually compare the actual numbers of votes, and both Labour and Conservatives got less than they got in 2019. And
well done for working that out so quickly.
I may have had a bit of help with that.
Maybe you did, yes.
But I mean, firstly, obviously, congratulations to Labour and to Alistair Strathern. And, my heart goes out to Emma Holland-Lindsay, who's worked so hard. And
over a long period of time.
For us over such a long time. But I think we're actually quite pleased with that result, short of a win, obviously. But it does go to show, exactly as John Curtis was saying, and exactly what we're finding on the doorsteps is that, people are leaving the Conservative Party in droves, and many people are, coming to the Liberal Democrats. They see in us a party that they can support, who share their values. They want to support a local champion like Emma is in her current role as a councillor, would have been as an MP. Exactly as you just said, it's a split between Labour and the Lib Dems.
Echoes of the 92 to 97 period, when we all know what happened in that landslide of Tony Blair in 1997. Those echoes seem to be getting louder, don't they?
Well, yes. But as I said to you earlier, Joe, I think it's extremely convenient, to try and sort of say that somehow we're back where we were 25 years ago. This by-election was, as I said, like no other. I mean, you've got that three-way split, you've got that really negative start. There was clearly a lot of dissatisfaction with what happened with Nadine Dorries. That came out on the doorsteps very strongly. We had a very strong local candidate, it was liked, but it wasn't going to be enough to really deal with quite powerful local
she blames, of course, as you know, Rishi Sunak and the fact that he's in negative personal ratings. And,
Look, the fact that I am prepared, and I'm not even a member of the government anymore, to come on programmes like this, to talk about my party, shows the depth of my commitment to the Conservative cause. I believe in the Conservative Party.
We welcome
and I
you for that.
believe in the Conservative Party as being a party of the nation. What I don't like is naked self-interest and a lack of team ethos, and that was being displayed, I'm afraid. And what Conservatives need to do now is coalesce, come together, remember why we are in politics, to serve the national interest, to get behind the Prime Minister, and to make sure that this election is not just competitive, but that we can deliver a Conservative government working in the national interest. Yes. That's the job of every Conservative now.
Hats off to you. Well done for being here to defend the Conservative Party. It is curious that there isn't a Conservative minister here, though, to give the explanation of the government to these defeats tonight.
Andrew Bowie was here for many hours.
He's not here now, though, is he?
Well, I think he can be forgiven. He's gone back, no doubt, to finish his red box, as I used to do in the long watches of the night. I don't have one of those anymore. I'm able to come on and defend my party. Yeah. And, John, as you said quite sagely earlier, you've had bad nights, you've come out to defend your party in bad nights. You're having a great night tonight. Enjoy it while you can. Fill your boots. But let's wait for the general election.
I'm not filling any boots. And obviously, I am delighted by these phenomenal results. They are stunning results. But we're focused on a general election. And we know we've got to work really, really hard to continue to win the trust of the British people, to focus on the issues that the British people care about, the cost of living, the NHS, crime on our streets, schools. They're the issues that we're going to be talking about and continue to talk about over the next 12 months. These are really important results. 20% swings in 3 seats now, 3 very, very secure, safe seats on paper. 20% swings are stunning results. Alongside that stunning result in Scotland, but we know we've got a lot of work to do over the next 12 months or so to win over the people, and we're going to be talking to the British people about the issues that they're concerned about.
And I'm glad that John said that, because I do think that's an acknowledgement that people are not yet in love with the Labour Party. They're out of love with the government. They've yet to be convinced, I think, about the nature of what the alternative government will be. That's the second part of the test that any opposition has to satisfy in order to win power. But, you know, I'll say this to him, it's going to be a properly contested battle. There are a lot of dividing lines. There are a lot of points being made that need to be countered about the achievements of this government, which are considerable, and that is the message that we've got to get out to the British public in the next year.
Well, let's hear from the winning candidate, now MP, the new Labour MP for Mid Bedfordshire, Alistair Strathern. First of all, congratulations to you, Alistair, after what's obviously been a very long and exhausting campaign. What do you think now? You may only have a year until the general election. What will you focus on?
Well, I think for me, Joe, it's going to be working incredibly hard to show that the people who've supported me right across Mid Bedfordshire have put their faith in the right man and the right party. I've been so encouraged and grateful for the incredibly warm response we got right across Mid Bedfordshire to our offer of a hard-working MP focused on the issues that mattered and part of a party with the real answers to the challenges we're facing. It's on me now to work really hard from tomorrow until that general election to show people right across Mid Bedfordshire that I've got things done for them and that they've put their faith in the right candidate. But in the meantime, I'm just so grateful for people for giving this the opportunity.
But was this really a vote for Labour and for Keir Starmer and for you, obviously, or a vote against the Conservatives? There's no doubt the Conservative vote collapsed, but a lot of votes went to the Liberal Democrats too. It was not evenly, but fairly evenly split. So how much of it was really a vote for you and Labour?
Look, we were really encouraged from day one how open people were to the idea of doing something different this time round. And the number of people who are telling me they're voting Labour for the very first time today was incredibly moving. We know we've got to keep working hard to earn people's trust and to show those people who supported me this time that they've put their faith in the right person. But I've been so encouraged across this campaign that people are looking and recognising that the Labour Party has changed, and increasingly it's the Labour values that speak to communities like ours here in Mid Bedfordshire.
And what is the one issue, the overriding issue for people in Mid Bedfordshire?
I think for me, it's the desire to get back to a politics of respect. From the issues on our NHS to the cost of living to the lack of police on our streets, people feel like our communities here haven't been properly respected by the government over recent years. And from day one as their MP, I want to champion changing that.
I mean, in terms of those issues, like the NHS, public services in general, isn't the problem that you aren't going to have resources, money to spend on those public services in terms of raising taxes or borrowing? So how are you going to do it? What did you tell people on the doorstep you were going to do?
Well, I think for me, it's about having a credible, serious party that's got a plan to turn it around. Under Labour, we've got a 10-year plan to get the NHS back on track, and you're quite right, it can't just be about spending more money, but targeted investment raised from that non-dom tax loophole being closed to make sure we're investing back in modernising the NHS in technology, and some of the instant investment we know we need will be a really important part of that. But it's also about modernising it, getting the workforce back in place, and making sure we've truly got the structure of NHS that's fit for purpose. All of these things are going to be big challenges, and that's why I'm encouraged that the Labour Party isn't promising a quick fix. We've got a long-term plan to get it back on track, and that's a plan that people supported today.
But you'll know that lots of people in the constituency struggling with cost of living want something to happen quite quickly. They'll want to see things improve under a Labour government if you win next year, whenever that general election is. And as you say, you're not going to be able to do it. It's not going to be quick.
It's not going to be quick, Joe, but actually I think the Labour Party will be able to turn things around pretty sharply. Lots of business leaders, lots of people right across our country are crying out for stability, grown-up politics and a long-term plan. All of those things are what they're going to have under a Labour government, and all of those things I think will have a pretty instant effect in creating confidence again, getting the economy back on track, but also ensuring we've got a government that through these tough times is open to targeted support, like some of that extra money with the new windfall tax on energy bills, to make sure that we're properly supporting people through difficult times, but have a stable long-term plan to get things back where we need them to be.
I mean, you won't have long to prove yourself, as I say, because there probably will be a general election next year. So what will your priorities be?
I think my priority from day one is being present, active and showing that I'm working hard on the issues that people have been telling me really matter to them. One of the beauties of the length of this campaign is we've had an opportunity to speak to people right across Mid Bedfordshire and build up a really detailed understanding of the issues that need tackling. From trying to reroute local bus routes to getting on top of some of the challenges around town planning to making sure I'm working with some of the particular GP surgeries that are facing problems here. We've got a big bank of issues for me to be working hard on from day one right up until that general election to show people by the time they do go to vote again that they put their faith in the right party.
Well, Alistair, you will be pleased to know, and I'm sure you've already received it, congratulations from Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, saying that they're both, it's yours and in Tamworth, the victories, phenomenal results that show Labour is back in the service of working people and redrawing the political map. Winning in these Tory strongholds shows that people overwhelmingly want change and they're ready to put their faith in our changed Labour Party to deliver it. Was Keir Starmer an asset on the doorstep, or was it much more about the party?
I think absolutely. I think the two go hand in hand. The Labour Party wouldn't be where it is right now without Keir Starmer's leadership. It's the changes he's made to bring us closer to values that we have here in Mid Bedfordshire that have been so powerful. Those values of respect, community first, country first politics are so important, and that's given us the platform we've needed to be able to deliver such a historic result here and set us up for hopefully a historic win going into the next general election.
Alistair Strathern, thank you very much and congratulations again.
Thanks, Jane.
You're welcome. Listening to Alistair Strathern there, a lot of focus on decency and service, maybe trying to sort of press the point about his predecessor, Nadine Dorries, but also politics in general, because that is one of the reasons that a lot of people have been turned off politics. It's not just the big issues that we've talked about, the economy and health. It's about politics itself.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that in Tamworth, where we saw the turnout rate go down. It appears there was some apathy there, but clearly in Mid Bedfordshire, people said that on the doors Nadine Dorries was coming up. But the common factor in both of these seats, where we've seen a swing of more than 20% in both, is clearly people unhappy with the Tory party. I thought it was interesting what Robert said about now the Tory party has to come together and be united. I mean, if we look at the record from the last couple of months, I think that is wishful thinking. We've got the autumn statement in a couple of weeks' time. We know it will happen. Loads of Robert's colleagues will spend the next couple of weeks saying we need tax cuts now. And then we'll have others like Robert who says if we have tax cuts now, that's going to be a massive mistake. And it seems like we're going to have a Tory party pulling itself apart rather than uniting. Right.
I mean, the Tory party is quite good at coming together when the focus is a general election and people are thinking about their seats. And it may seem selfish, but it is one of the driving motivators for members of Parliament. Is there a sense that people might pull together, or is it going to be in the way that John's described it, particularly over the next few months while that autumn statement is hanging?
I mean, the Tory party likes to win and MPs want to keep their seats. So you would imagine a scenario where there's tighter discipline. I think that what probably makes it hard to say that's definitely going to be the case this time is, it's not normally the case. You think about ousting two leaders within the space of a year, and the fact that you have figures such as Liz Truss who want to make a lot of noise, and you have quite a lot of figures in the Tory party who seem to be more concerned with the debate that follows after an election defeat than working out how to win. I don't think that's the majority of Tory MPs, but the problem for people such as Robert is that it's quite a noisy few. And I've had figures say to me, they need to decide, are they a university debating society or are they a political party? And, time is running out.
I mean, what do you think? Do you think those voices should now stay quiet? The Liz Trusses of this world, even those who are perhaps jockeying for position, which clearly is going on behind the scenes, Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, that they've moved ahead. They've accepted you've lost.
Well, look, the perception is very dangerous, I accept that. And I think any colleague who is allowing that perception to prevail should really think very carefully about what they do and what they say in the next 12 months. This is about the future of our country here. And as John said, there are big dividing lines. This is not New Labour. This is a Labour Party that is in some ways going back to some of its roots in the 60s and 70s. It's a corporatist approach to politics, which of course very much chimes with Keir's hero Harold Wilson. Now, that's a big difference from the past. And I think that as Conservatives, we now need to, make it very clear what the next 5 years is going to look like. And that's what I'm looking for from the Prime Minister and our leaders. I'm not looking for, as you say, academic arguments about issues that are not going to swing voters. I'm looking for serious, grown-up approaches to the issues that really matter on the economy, on housing, on the future for our young people. We've got some good Conservative answers to these issues. Let's hear them, and let's hear nothing else in the next 12 months.
Right, but do you think they haven't been articulated, those arguments, then very powerfully?
I think that we've got to do far better. The lesson, there's always a lesson to be drawn from by-election defeats. And the lesson should be for the party in government to look very carefully at how it projects itself, what it is saying, and how it is relating to the concerns of people out there in the country.
What would you want to hear from Rishi Sunak?
Well, look, I think that absolutely the 5 priorities he set out was the best place to start. I think there is still an opportunity for him, at the turn of the year to say, look, that was 2023. These priorities are still going to be important in 24, but here's my vision for Britain in 2028, because the election is going to be about the future, not the past, and it's about that prospect of government and how we're going to govern that is going to swing and determine how people vote.
So it's not New Labour, then. It sort of echoes of Harold Wilson and his government.
It's Keir's Labour. It's Keir's Labour. Like, my worry is we're now going to have sort of 12 months of chaos. 12 months of chaos with the Tory party divided from top to bottom. When there are so many issues affecting the country, from the National Health Service to the schools with the roofs collapsing to the cost of living crisis, and a government simply unable to both make amends for the past or set out a course for the future because of the chaos and the division. You've got the Liz Truss pushing Rishi Sunak around, you've got various cabinet ministers jockeying for position, you've got some ex-cabinet ministers dancing the night away at their conferences with
Well, there are a
Nigel
lot
Farage.
of them, of course.
I mean, I just think it's going to be a complete chaos, and that is such a tragedy for the country when there are so many big issues that we need to confront. And do we really want 5 more years of this? That's the risk. If you get Rishi Sunak re-elected, completely pushed around by Liz Truss and all these characters. So, look, I think the country wants change. It's yearning for change. We should just get that general election and get on with it.
Right, well, we'll come back to the general election. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind just holding on a moment, because we're going to go back to Tamworth and speak to Ione Wells. Ione, we've had the result, obviously, stunning victory for Labour, but give us a sense, a flavour of those sort of final moments to the announcement.
Well, it sort of was building and building and building, and then all happened at once. There was growing speculation after it was thought that the result wouldn't come in until about 3:30 and 4, that actually the result was much quicker than expected. We had a sudden dash where we went from this sports hall into the other room where the kind of declaration was made. And one interesting thing was there was a moment actually before the declaration where all the candidates, apart from the Conservative candidate, was on stage. He was running a bit late, he wasn't there, and everyone was kind of asking questions about why he was there. He then did turn up and the announcement was made. After that announcement, he made a pretty quick dash for the exit, didn't really want to stick around after that disappointing result for the Conservatives. Labour absolutely thrilled. There was lots of cheers in the room from Labour supporters. I think many of them had kind of previously, before the evening, been managing expectations among their camp, saying just how big a swing they would need to overturn the Tory majority here. As the night went on, as I think we talked about earlier, their confidence seemed to just grow and grow, clearly getting a sense that they had managed to get quite a significant vote out, enough to swing this seat in what was the 57th safest Tory seat in the country. I think one of the things, just speaking to Labour supporters here tonight, that they are feeling particularly happy about is they feel like the fact that this was such a safe Tory seat, that this wasn't necessarily a prime Labour target, suggests that they may be on course to win many other seats that aren't as safe for the Conservatives. I think there will potentially, as a result, be lots of Conservative MPs with much smaller majorities than there were here in Tamworth, feeling pretty nervous about their seats tomorrow.
Yes, indeed. Ione Wells, we'll let you go there in Tamworth. They're clearing up behind you, clearly, as they would at 10 to 4 in the morning. Sarah, just to get some thoughts from you in terms of the next 12 months and what happens and what your party will be focusing on before the general election.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just listening to what Robert was saying there about there always being lessons to learn from a by-election, and I think the lesson from these two by-elections is really, really clear that Conservatives are losing support, and support for the Conservatives has dropped like a stone, not just in these two by-elections, but in the by-election successes that we've had throughout this Parliament. And people want a general election, they want change, and I personally feel the sooner we have that general election, the better, because Johnson's right. You know, we are just going to go on, and it's just going to be so painful the next 12 months. And the sooner we have a general election, I think the better. And I think it's very clear from tonight that that's what the public want. From our point of view, we'll be very much focusing on those seats that we think we can win. We'll be redoubling our efforts. Actually, we've taken quite a lot of encouragement from that Mid Bedfordshire result. As I say, we are the only party to actually put on actual votes, and that shows that Tory voters from 2019 have switched to us, came out and supported Emma this time, and we'll certainly be building on that in the seats we hope to win.
I mean, in terms of the date of the general election, we all like to speculate about when that might be, and there are arguments for and against a May or an October or certainly an autumn general election. Are you hearing anything more about timing? I mean, presumably the government wants to wait for some of the headline economic figures to turn around, particularly the one on inflation, to reach that target of halving it to about 5% by the end of the year, and that there might be some growth. But I mean, are these things going to be enough to decide when it is Rishi Sunak goes to the country? I suppose the old adage is you hold on to power for as long as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a moving picture when it comes to when the election will be, because the upside and why, some in Number 10 have always like the idea of spring is that we're talking about, the ground game. If you do it at the same time of local elections, you're getting all your vote out at that time. You also potentially, have some very difficult local elections that could change the mood once again, and then you're going to election later in the year. They also do want to time it so, in the best possible place for the economy. But there's all, is there a black swan or some event they're not thinking about, which means that if you don't go in spring, suddenly things feel worse in the autumn. And then you have the gallows humour figures who start saying, well, actually January looks quite nice, and that's obviously not the January that we're about to get to.
No.
So I think that, I think every date has problems right now for the Tory party, because you look at the polls, and I think while the Tories are 20 points behind Labour, and while you're getting by-election results like this, it's really hard to suggest, what's a good idea, guys? We're going to go a bit early. And therefore, it just is something which I think is, you can see a scenario where it keeps being pushed in the hope that something turns up.
John?
Well, you look at inflation has started to come down slightly, but the prices in shops are still just as expensive as they were. They've not come down. People's mortgages are still very expensive. My mortgage is coming up next month. More and more, the longer we go on, the more people come to the end of their fixed deals, and then suddenly their mortgage gets whacked up. And those people, as I said earlier, who are on pretty good salaries, are now struggling to make the sums add up. And who do they blame for that? They blame the Tory party. And as much as Robert says that they were going to set out a vision of what they're going to do between now and 2028, I think most people will realise that the Tory party in 2019 won an 80-seat majority. They haven't sorted out housing, they haven't sorted out the NHS, and they've sent the economy backwards. What would they do with a reduced majority? They're not going to suddenly deal with those problems.
I mean, Robert, one of the things, this might feel a bit left field for all of you, but actually, as you were talking there, John, one of the decisions, because actually one figure that has gone in the right direction a bit is wages, and they have, I think, outstripped inflation for the first time in certainly a couple of years. But what will that mean for uprating of benefits, which is a big deal? And that has to be decided, and it usually is decided on the highest of the three measures, whether it's prices, 2.5%, or wages. So the wages, I mean, that could be quite high. You're going to, or should the government uprate? I know this isn't your decision, but...
Well, I mean, I think I made my view very clear when I was in government last year. I think the government will have to uprate this benefits in line with inflation. I think that is inevitable, and I think that tinkering with the triple lock is going to be difficult as well. So, my view is that they need to factor those things in as realities now, and then work, on that assumption. Look, I know that when people feel they've got a little bit more money in their pocket, and to take John's point, it does change their outlook. And whilst I accept it, there are going to be pressures on people with regard to increased mortgages, even though
also
mortgages...
the price of oil is going up. I mean,
well, indeed,
we're going to see...
indeed. And, even if mortgages aren't going to go quite as up to the horrendous levels we thought they might do last year, that's still an increase for people.
Yeah.
And that's why, I in all my thinking, always try and resolutely focus on, the point of view of the elector, which is why in these elections, clearly people going out to vote, those that did go out to vote in these 2 by-elections, said we want to send a message to the government that we are not happy.
Yeah.
And when voters are not happy, then governments suffer. Now, that still, I think, gives the government time. They are the government. They have the control of policy, the levers of policy. It's an immense privilege and it's immense responsibility. And that's why I think just, remembering that at the heart of everything has to be the watchword of the Conservative Party in the next year.
Jonathan, and it is about trust in the economy and whether people feel better off after 13 years. Now, when you look at it where we're sitting here today, the answer would probably be no. But if things do improve and inflation is coming down, but as you say, the prices are still high. I mean, they're still going up. They're just going up by a slower amount. There might be some things coming down a bit. Things like uprating benefits. Presumably Labour's still very committed to the triple lock when it comes to pensions and uprating of benefits.
Yeah, we were pushing them to maintain their election promise on the triple lock.
Is it still affordable?
Well, look, in terms of the next 5 years, Labour will set out its policy in a manifesto, but the Conservatives were elected in 2019 on a commitment on the triple lock, and we have been pushing them to hold to their promise that they made to Britain's retirees.
Do you think it will change, though, if people feel they are a little better off than they were, even if they're not much better off? People might think maybe we'll just stick with the Conservatives one more time.
Well, look, I think one of the big questions at the next general election, which will, at that point, will have had 14 years of the Conservatives, is whether are you better off than you were 14 years ago? And I think this issue around mortgages is the key one. Because a year ago, the economy was pushed off a cliff, which led to the Bank of England putting up mortgage rates because of the unfunded spending commitment, taxation commitments that Liz Truss pursued. And I think, as John said, people who are getting their letters or have had their letters saying you've got to remortgage and this is the extra you are paying, and I've had family members who have been in this situation, they know that's because of the decisions taken by the Conservatives. And in the end, Rishi Sunak can make speeches about, meat taxes and all that 7 bins nonsense. In the end, people are paying more on their mortgage because of decisions taken by Conservative
But if you're going into the election saying, vote Labour, we won't spend any more money on public services, vote Labour...
That's not what we're saying.
Well, but there isn't going to be much difference, is there?
Well, there is. There's going to be a hell of a difference.
You are going to inherit the economic backdrop that you have just outlined and described.
We're going to inherit an economic mess, after 14 years of the Conservatives, absolutely.
Right, but you can't guarantee that it's going to change. You can't guarantee growth. You can't guarantee it quickly. And so in the end, why would people vote for you?
Let me give you a very quick example, right? The reasons why we've got so many people out of work is because they cannot get treatment on the NHS for mental health issues or musculoskeletal issues, right? One of the big policies that we've put forward is a reform to the NHS which will deliver 2 million more appointments a year. That's good for people's health. It'll also get people back to work. You get people back to work, you grow the economy.
What do you think we're going to hear? Will we hear a lot more from Labour? Do they have to put a lot more flesh on the bones in the next year if they're getting these sorts of results? They're 16 to 20 points ahead in the polls.
Well, I think that you've seen over the last couple of years there has been a reluctance from Labour to set out policy after policy after policy. Remember what we had at the last election with Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, and there seemed to be so many promises. They were just putting them out every day. I think that they've realised that you have to slightly condense it. But you have seen the conversation slightly changing. So you take a year ago, all our interviews with Labour politicians or anything we did with Labour, it was all about attacking the Tory party. You look at Labour conference this year, it was much more about starting to set out the basics of policy. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next few months as we get further and further closer towards an election.
Katie?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Keir Starmer's currently reducing the policy he has because you see Labour going back, some being removed from websites, to you know, as Jonathan I know is playing a key role in this, the machinery of government and how you action things.
Are you?
So, alongside Sue
You
Gray.
may say that, I couldn't possibly know.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we will get more policy, but really we're in the refining stage for Labour because they don't want to announce too much. I think it's actually a view they announced a lot early on and no one paid attention, and now everyone is paying attention and it's causing them a bit of a problem.
Right. I mean, it is interesting that even in the conference speech by Keir Starmer, there was a sense of not over-promising. Because there weren't many policies in there. I mean, there was a big thing on housing. Not over-promising, not being too ambitious. There is that recognition that you aren't going to have much to work with.
No, I don't accept that. We are ambitious for this country. Of course we're ambitious for this country, but we're not going to make big, grand promises that can't be delivered. I mean, we're supposed to have 40 new hospitals. Where are these 40 new hospitals? Do you remember that promise?
Well,
you know,
what has happened?
Well, I think that it's right to say that a lot of the developments that were promised are coming on stream. I've seen it in my own local hospital, for example. I mean, there's a lot of investment. This is why I do get rather fed up with this parallel universe which the Labour Party still occupy. You know, the idea that somehow, you know, there have been cuts in health spending when you've seen 50 billion.
I said you promised us 40 new hospitals.
You know, the general message is somehow that, you know, the health service has been slaughtered by the Tories. It's just
no, I've never said that.
true.
I led on health for years for the Labour Party.
Yes,
I always said that the health budget had gone up, but it had never gone up by the historic 4% uplift.
It's never going to be enough for Labour, and that is the problem. You cannot answer the fundamental question of how it is that you actually will meet the promises that you're making. You're going to stick probably to a Tory spending envelope and try and squat in the middle ground.
All right.
Deeply boring.
I'm going to have to cut you off because that's all we have time for. But thank you to all of our guests for sticking with me, keeping me company throughout the night. And it's been a big night, an interesting night too, but a big night for Labour. 2 by-election wins in Mid Bedfordshire and in Tamworth. Neither of these seats traditional Labour territory, but they have won quite stunning victories in both. We will chew over these results and give you more analysis tomorrow in Politics Live. I'll be up in a few hours' time again to present that at 12:15 tomorrow. But Alistair Strathern, the new Labour MP in Mid Bedfordshire, and Sarah Edwards, the new Labour MP in Tamworth, will have plenty to celebrate after those long campaigns. But from all of us here, I hope you do go to bed if you're still watching. But thank you for watching if you have done, and I'll be back tomorrow. From all of us here, bye-bye.